think you and Brian are the two most important Spider-Man writers of the 21st century. And here's my case for it. So
Okay.
I feel that Brian, with Ultimate Spider-Man, redefined Spider-Man for a generation. Right?
Boom. I'm with you.
But you have introduced so many elements, new elements to Spider-Man that have stuck. And
Like Miles Morales.
well, yes, he also has Miles Morales. Okay, he might win. So
He created Miles Morales.
So
well, he co-created with Sarah Pacelli.
welcome to the Comics Cube, everyone. I am with the one and only Dan Slott.
Hello, Comics Cube.
The first question I ask everyone on comes on the show is, why do you love comics?
Why do I love comics? It started for me at a really early age, probably around like 6 or 8, where I had cousins who read comics, and that just became the delivery system. My cousin Meyer read comics, and when we went to visit his house for Passover, and this will date me. I was so old. I am so old that we didn't have long boxes. You kept your comics in boxes. There were no specialty, to shape, form. And he had all these boxes of comics, and the only superhero comics he read were Fantastic Four. Like, he mainly read like war comics, like Sergeant Rock, Enemy Ace, Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, and he read horror comics, House of Secrets, House of Mystery, Ghosts, a couple others. But since he liked Jack Kirby from Sergeant Fury, he followed Fantastic Four. And when I was visiting, he knew that, like, I watched things on TV, like the Spider-Man cartoon show from 1967 was in syndication when I was growing up. You could watch that after school, and the Adam West Batman show. So he knew I knew who Spider-Man and Batman were, and that I like superheroes. So he let me read his Fantastic Four comics. So I knew what comics were, but I thought that's where they came from. I thought they came from my cousin's playroom, where they had the ping pong table and the giant teddy bear. I thought that's where comics, like mushrooms grew in the forest. I thought that's where they came from. I think I knew from, like, we had 7-Elevens with spinner racks. Like, I kind of knew where comics were, but I didn't really feel the need. Like, why? I have cartoons. I have this and that and the other. I'd rather have toys. But one day, Spider-Man was coming to my 7-Eleven to sign comic books. Someone had a Spider-Man suit, and they were going to come to 7-Eleven, and they were going to sign comics. And I was the right age where I was all in. I was like a little Jewish boy who had no Santa Claus or Easter Bunny. That this was, if we went to Disney, all I wanted to do was hug the characters. I wanted to hug Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and Goofy, Tigger. That's all I cared about. So, like, oh my God, Spider-Man the actual Spider-Man is coming to my town. So I wanted to meet Spider-Man, and I knew the only way to meet him was to have the comics, and that's why I bought my first 2 comics. And then once I read them, and they were mine, within like a week, the covers had fallen off because I'd read those 2 comics so many times. So I still have one of them. I still have the physical one of it, but it's beaten to hell. And it doesn't have Spider-Man's signature on it because that was on the cover, and that's gone. That's long gone. But then that became my thing. Every weekend I would buy, I would get an allowance of 1 quarter, and I would buy a comic. And it was almost always Spider-Man or Batman. Every now and then, Marvel 2-in-1, because I liked the Thing from reading him in my cousin's old FF. So, and I wanted to see, my favorites were the team-up books. because Spider-Man and Batman, like Marvel Team Up and Brave and Bold, introduced me to the rest of the other characters. Like I almost wanted to read Team Up more than Amazing or Marvel Tales, because I wanted to learn more. Like, oh, here's Spider-Man, he's teaming up with the Beast. And this guy, the Beast, is talking about the X-Men. Who are those guys? You know, like what's going on? And oh my God, here's Batman. He's teaming up with this guy called Mr. Miracle. And he's got a green cape and he floats on these discs. Like, what? Like, that's how I met everybody. Eventually, there was you guys on Comics Cube. You're probably too young. You don't probably remember UHF, where you had, it's before, like, there's like the dawn of cable. We just started getting cable television. This is how old I am. But before then, everything was broadcast. So you got your NBC, your ABC, your CBS, and a few other channels. But then on your TV, there was this dial that said UHF. And it was for local broadcasts. Like the broadcast signal couldn't go that far. So they had these small, tiny local channels. And you had this extra set, because you've all seen like TV antenna in cartoons, like those two long, where they had this extra special thing you put on top of your TV that looked like an orrery. It had like these moving circles, and it was a whole like way more complicated thing. And you had to move these dials till the UHF channel came in. And there was on one UHF channel, they had 1960s really off the wall DC comics, like Arnold Drake, Bruno Premiani, Doom Patrols, a lot of stuff with like Adam Strange, the Space Cabbie, Ultra the Multi-Alien, a lot of weird offbeat DC 60 stuff that they kind of felt they weren't going to get sued for. And they had these programs where they took these comics and they put the camera one panel at a time. And they had 3 voice actors off camera, one doing the male hero, one doing the female characters, and one doing the villains and everybody else. And they would kind of act it out. And what it really was there for was to teach immigrants how to speak English in a fun way.
That's awesome.
And supposedly this went around to a lot of different UHF channels. And I was talking about, like, that was my intro to a lot of DC comics. They didn't do mainstream stuff. They didn't do Green Lantern or Superman or Flash or Batman. They just did like the most oddball stuff. And years later, I was talking about this on a panel, and Larry Hama was on the panel with me. And Larry Hama was going, that was me. I did that. That was my voice. I was the guy reading those other characters. I was like, oh my God, Larry Hama. You introduced young little like 6-year-old, 8-year-old me to all the weirdest DC comic stuff. Part of me wants to see if this is online anywhere now. Because there was a Fantastic Four radio show.
Really?
Back in the day that Marvel did, where they just read the comics. And the only reason we've kept recordings of it, and you can find it online, is a very pre-Saturday Night Live, a very young Bill Murray was the voice of Johnny Storm.
Wow.
So if you want to hear young Bill Murray, go check it. You can find him on YouTube. The old radio show versions of the Fantastic Four comics.
That is insane. You loved Spider-Man, you loved Batman, and you loved The Thing. Could you ever forecast like that you would be writing these characters many years later?
Never in a million years. I was doing when I graduated from college, I had this great offer from TriStar Pictures. They asked me to write a spec script. I'd somehow gotten a copy of my senior thesis, which was a play, somehow to someone at TriStar, and it went around and someone went, hey, this kid's good. And they asked me to write a spec script that was nothing like like a complete, like they said, just pick any other genre. Just show us you can do more than one thing and write whatever kind of movie you want. We're not going to do it. We will not buy your script. We just want to see that you can do it. And they were talking about hiring me as a script doctor, someone who would like read stuff and then punch up scripts. And that was a great offer. So I needed to hang around my college. And I had a superhero strip I did in my college paper. And so I was drawing it like I thought back then
Really?
I could draw. Yeah, it was terrible. It was called The Nuke Surfer. It was about a post-apocalyptic world and this surfer who surfed off the afterblasts of nuclear explosions
Oh,
in
that
a realm
feels
where they were
really
constantly exploding.
that feels really relevant to this point in time.
It was terrible. It was awful, and I couldn't draw. But I was drawing it like, you know, the right proportions for and I was filling up a portfolio. You would get a one comic book size page shrunk down into my school paper, but I was drawing like I was penciling and inking and lettering terribly, one comic page a week. Um, but I was getting paid for it, and I sold some merch. I sold Nuke Surfer TV t-shirts, and while I was trying to write this spec script and working at nights at a Kinko's, like right out of college, and I needed money, like I kept doing the comic strip. So I was that guy that like, didn't he graduate? And I'd keep like walking on campus and turning in my Nuke Surfer page and getting like $50. And it was like an extra $50. That's some gas money for a while. And after like 6 months of, I kept writing one spec script and then stopping and then writing a completely different genre and then stopping and then writing it. I had like all these half scripts and I was freaking out. Like, and then I was worried, like, did I miss the window? Because the guy told me to take all the time in the world, and then I didn't know what I was going to do. And some friends kind of dragged me off the beach, and they went like, okay, you know, Dan, you've got like a whole portfolio of comic book stuff, and you've always wanted to work in comics. Why don't you go to the comic conventions and show your pages and get pointers? And at one of those comic conventions, someone told me about the Marvel internship. So I was like, I looked into it and I applied. But I was now like 6 months out of college.
Yeah.
And I went to New York for one of my sister's weddings. And I had gotten a meeting at Marvel through I'd followed all the procedures to get the internship. And I did an interview. And before they even let me do the interview, like 5 minutes in, they were like, oh, what college do you go to? I'm like, I just graduated from, and they went, we can't use you. And I'm like, what? And they're like, it's a college internship. We don't pay. Back then, they didn't pay. And they said, we pay you by giving you a college credit. And I was like,
Mm.
and they're like, if we can't give you college credit, we can't use you. And I was like, God damn it. So I went away, and then I kept trying to do the stuff. And like 3 months later or something, my other sister got married, and I had to go back to New York for that wedding.
Where were you
Second
living
wedding,
at this
twin
time?
sister. I was still like living near my campus in California. I was
Okay.
convinced I was gonna try to make it out there in Hollywood. Um, and that time I figured they're not gonna remember me from like 5 minutes. So I
Mhm.
tried the whole procedure again. And this time I went to one of my college professors, even though I graduated, and got him to write up a form saying it was for a post college credit, independent study. And that time, when they asked what college you go to, I just lied. I said I was going to the college I just graduated from. And then they took me, and I got to be the college intern. And while I was there, I networked, and they liked me, and they wanted me. They said, it's a shame you got to go back to college because we want to offer you this staff job.
You never found out?
And I was, oh, no. Then I went, I'll take the staff job. And they went, but don't you have to go back to college? I'm like, I graduated. They're like, really? And I came back with my college diploma. I was like, look, I graduated. And they're like, okay, it's your job. um, I've told this story before because I used to people would ask how'd you break into comics, and my wacky answer was I lied. You know, they'd be like, "No, what did you do?" I'm like, I said I was still in college. So and then some people over the years have taken that story, and the reason people know it is because I've told it frequently, and they went, Dan Slott lied his way into comics. Dan Slott denied a college intern their spot. I did not deny anyone a spot. There were many spots still available that summer. No one got bumped by me being Fabian Niciez's college intern. Everything's fine. um, but yeah, so I got to be a staffer, and back then, um, there was no policy at Marvel that if you were on staff you couldn't write. That that didn't exist back then. Back then, Tom DeFalco was editor in chief, and he was writing Fantastic Four and Thor, and Bob Harris was the head of the X-Men unit, and he was writing Avengers. Mark Grunwald was the second in command, and he was writing Captain America and Quasar. Like, it was everybody was working for everybody else on staff. The easiest way to get work at Marvel at that point in time was to be on staff. So by being on staff, I was able to hustle for work, and eventually I sold a full issue for Mighty Mouse,
Yeah.
and I'd written lots of backup stories in Marvel Comics Presents and annuals. Um, and the Mighty Mouse issue for Fabian did well. He thought it was funny enough that when there was a Nickelodeon anthology book coming up, I pitched to work on these two characters called Ren and Stimpy. And back then, I knew who they were because I went to animation festivals and I saw the short Big House Blues, which was later became their pilot. And everyone else who was pitching for this just look at the packet that Nickelodeon provided, and they were just these two random characters. But I already knew what their deal was, and I thought they were great. No one else knew who they were, so I was like the only guy who pitched. And I as the project got further, Ren and Stimpy became popular, and then they decided to make it an all Ren and Stimpy book and not worry about Doug and Rugrats and any of the other stuff. And Marvel put out a Ren and Stimpy book, and before any other writer could pitch for it, I already had like 2 issues in the drawer. And it was going to be like an anthology book with lots of writers coming on and working on it. But the book was doing phenomenally well. I had the voices down. They liked all the stuff I was doing. And by like the 3rd or 4th issue, I just asked Fabian, like, can I just have the book? And he was like, you can have the book. And the second he told me you could have the book, I went to my boss at Marvel for the division I was in for my staff job. I gave them my 2 weeks notice. And then I was out, and I was freelance full time. I wanted to be a writer. So yeah, so once I had my monthly book, I was like, later. It was like, bye. It was
Did you
great.
realize
I had a
back
fun
then that
time on
humor?
staff.
Did you realize back then that humor was your thing?
Um, I'd always, like back in college, I wanted to do the superhero strip. And when I originally pitched it, they didn't want me to do it. And at that time, Far Side was out. And uh, Larson had taken a sabbatical, and all the newspapers were just running reruns of old Far Side strips. And my college paper was only paying for one comic strip. They ran the Far Side. And the person running the budget went, we're not paying money for reruns. And I kept pitching them over and over again. I want to do this superhero thing in the school paper. Then they said, hey, you can draw. If you do a Far Side knockoff, we'll do your superhero book. So it's like, I could do a Far Side knockoff. So I did a Far Side knockoff, and it did well enough. And they just kept hiring me to do that. And I said, I will not give you the rest of these strips unless you let me do my superhero strip. So you can tell a joke. Telling a joke is not that hard. It's not that hard to do something funny, to do the setup, to do the payoff. And all my life, like, I'm sure you're the same. You watch like, Looney Tunes growing up. You watch stuff, and you always get, yeah, and you're always goofing around with your friends. The problem I had at Marvel was uh, I became the funny guy. Ren and Stimpy was my thing, and then I couldn't I couldn't get other gigs. I had to work twice as hard to like sell stories that weren't funny, to do like a Two Gun Kid story in Marvel Comics Presents, or a Daredevil story, or this kind of story or that. And I remember, and this is pre-internet, I remember being in the Marvel offices. I came in to write out my vouchers for Ren and Stimpy so I could get paid. And Nel Yomtov, this editor, I can't remember. I know he did the New Defenders, and I know he did Fantastic Force, but I can't remember the other books he did. But he had a slate of superhero books, and he saw I was in the office, and he poked his head in, and he went, "Dan," and I'm like, "Oh, and he went like, "I just read some superhero work you did. Like, I thought you were just like the funny guy. Those were good superhero comics." I was like, "Thank you." He's like, "You should do more of that." And I went, "Well, can I pitch you stuff?" And he's like, "Well, I'm full up." That was like the story of my life for a good 12, 15 years of, other companies would hire me and recruit me and try to steal me from Marvel. And back then I wasn't under exclusive. So suddenly I was doing Looney Tunes and Scooby-Doo and uh, all kinds of different licensed properties. Eventually it would become Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Lab and Cow and Chicken and everything. And then sometimes people go, "Oh, he does good licensed comics. Would you like to do an issue of Tomb Raider? Or would you like to do some Power Rangers?" So everything I was doing was like license or humor. And it wasn't till I I saw a way to break in at DC through the adventure line, Batman Adventure, Superman Adventure, where you're writing it for kids, and they use untested writers or writers who are working on other like Looney Tunes and other stuff. And then you could get editors to see how you wrote superhero stuff. So I did a number of Justice League adventure stories, and the editor for that, Dan Raspler, was talking to me one day in his office, and he went, "If I close my eyes and I imagine these stories with traditional art instead of the Bruce Timm style, that's a good Justice League issue.
Yeah.
Would you like to pitch anything?" And I threw like two of my best pitches at him. I pitched him a thing that was a mini series with an all new character, um, and I pitched him like an anthology book that was like the DC Universe version of the Twilight Zone, where the Phantom Stranger would be the Rod Serling, and then he would introduce you into a story, and it would be about a DC character. So it would be like Robin has a Twilight Zone adventure, Swamp Thing has a Twilight Zone adventure,
Yeah.
and it could be anything. But Phantom Stranger would be your Rod Serling, and you'd call the book Strange Adventures. And he liked both, and he pitched both at a meeting. I wasn't there. I didn't get to do the pitch. The editor did the pitch. And when it was in that room, people got hung up on the idea. They liked the all new character, and they greenlit that. And then they said they all got hung up on the idea that it was a Phantom Stranger book. And they're like, "Phantom Stranger doesn't sell. We can't sell a Phantom Stranger book."
But that wasn't
And
your
it's
pitch.
going around, yeah, and it's going around the room, and it's like the game Telephone. Everyone started picking it apart and throwing new things in it. And at one point, people, because it's DC, went, "Batman sells. What if it's set? What if it's set in Arkham Asylum?" And it's all instead of it being the Phantom Stranger, it's all in the mind of some crazy Arkham inmate, and they're your intro. And then it started going around the room, going, "Yeah, that's good. An Arkham Asylum book is good." And I I show up and I hang out with the editor, and we talk on like a Friday, and he goes, "I wanted to get back to you. Dan Rasper's telling me on the phone, like, just wanted you to know, I threw both pitches into the room. Both took off. They want to do both of them, except they don't want to do it as Phantom Stranger. Oh no, he didn't say that. What he said was they like your new character, and they went, oh, but they'd like you to do the Arkham Asylum book first.
What Arkham?
Yeah, he's like, yeah, they want you to do the book that's set in Arkham Asylum. No, and I get to do a book set in Arkham Asylum. He's like, yeah. And I'm like, you will have that on Monday. And I spent the whole weekend, I wrote up this pitch, an all new pitch, which was, if you remember the HBO show Oz, which was set in a prison. I went, this is Oz in Batman's world. And here's the pitch. And I pitched this thing, and part of me knew that this was like my one big shot, that if I did this dark and gritty and messed up Arkham Asylum book, no one was ever going to ask me to write Bugs Bunny again. I'd be like, this would be great. So I made sure there was like a Joker raping someone in the shower scene. It was great. He didn't, but it's implied.
Just to go away from the humor branding that you had back then, huh?
There was some humor in the Arkham Asylum book. It was just dark. Yeah. Like there's a bit where Joker and Two-Face escape when all this craziness is going on, and you cut to them and they're in the middle of nowhere, like they're miles from Arkham, and they're still in their prison jumpsuits, and Joker, like Two-Face and Joker are like, what are you gonna do? Should we do a team up? And Two-Face flips the coin and goes, no. I'm going this way. He's like, what are you gonna do? And Joker picks up a phone book and he just flips through it. He goes, I think I'm gonna kill everyone whose name makes a palindrome. Because that's the Joker.
That book is called Arkham Asylum Living Hell. You had like no better artist for it than Ryan Sook. What was that like?
Oh, Ryan Sook killed on that book. Ryan Sook was amazing. My first chance out of the gate to do a book that's going to break me through into superhero world, and I get Ryan Sook on his premiere book. He was amazing. There was one thing that I wanted to kill him over, which was we developed all these new characters. DC, they got cold feet right after they approved the book, where the Batman office didn't like the idea of this young writer who hadn't worked on these characters before having access to the crown jewels of the Batman villains.
That was their whole idea, wasn't it? Like,
yes. So I got told I could do my Arkham Asylum book if I didn't use any Batman villains. Yeah. So I said, how do I do that? They're like, just make up all new Batman villains like they've always been there. So I was like, okay, that's the assignment. I created a plethora of all new Batman villains. So I had to create like villains that felt like Batman villains that would fit into that universe. And I liked that. I liked the idea that whenever you think of Arkham Asylum, you think of a turnstile. Joker's in on Wednesday, Joker breaks out by Thursday. I like the idea that for these guys to be somewhat competent, and there were a whole slate of Batman villains who were lifers, who never broke out. That there's something fun about that. So we created Doodlebug and Humpty Dumpty and the Great White Shark and all kinds of different characters. And all that I needed was that they saw the script for the first issue and they liked it. And they went, you know what? You can use Batman villains. But now the whole thing had been plotted out. So the recurring Batman villains like Joker and Two-Face and Poison Ivy, they all became cameos and background characters. But that I like that. I think it served it better that way. And it's really been fun to see other writers pick up the Living Hell lunatics and use them in other ways. To see Paul Dini write Humpty Dumpty, to see other writers use Jane Doe it's been very nice. It's nice to see them live on. But that was the book that broke me out. Um, and then once I had that book, I could at that point Marvel had gone through so many staff changes. I barely knew anyone at Marvel, and I had a hard time breaking back in. That book, I heard from Tom Brevoort they were going to do a She-Hulk book, and I love She-Hulk. And with the weight of having done Arkham behind me and the credibility, I was able to go in and be seriously considered as one of the people in the Bake Off for the She-Hulk book. So it was like, hey, look, and my the rest is history. That broke me back into Marvel, and She-Hulk got me Initiative, and Initiative eventually got me Spider-Man.
I was gonna ask why you went to Marvel and didn't stay at DC, but the way you described working with editorial on Living Hell, I feel like you've
No, but
answered my question.
no, but that's working on editorial as someone who'd never done a superhero book. I could have stayed at DC. They offered me some Justice League stuff that eventually ran in Justice League Classified, and I had that 12-part miniseries that I'd sold them that I could have done, and I also had some Elseworlds that I came up with that they liked. But once I got over to Marvel, I'm way more of a Marvel guy.
Yeah.
So I got to do She-Hulk, and I got to do Spider-Man, Human Torch, and Great Lake Avengers,
The Thing.
and The Thing. Yeah. So I started, and then eventually, and Avengers: The Initiative was, in my mind, it was every toy in the toy box. I remember like looking at one issue where we had a sequence where Kirk Connors is talking to Hank McCoy. Kirk Connors is talking to Henry Pym while they're watching these new characters I created train with the Thing. And then you cut to another scene where Peter Gyrick is hanging out with Danny Moonstar, and they talk to the Beast, and I'm like, the whole toy box is open with the Initiative. And then once you get Spider-Man, that's it. Once you get to Spider-Man, that's the dream gig. It was tough because I'd just gotten onto Mighty Avengers, and when they offered me to be the solo writer of Spider-Man, part of the deal was they said you have to give up Avengers. You have to leave that book. And I'd spent so much time with Hank Pym and Joe Costa and Jarvis and Hercules, and it was fun. I had to let it go so I could do Spidey twice a month by myself.
Oh, was it a workload thing?
It was a workload thing. I can only comfortably do 2 books a month, and it's been that way forever. Every now and then you can get the engine running hot, and I can do 3 books a month for a short stint, or I can do 2 books and some short stories or a special. But once you start top loading it, and you can look at my schedule, like whenever a giant Spider-Man event was coming up where you would need extra issues or big things, then the issues before it, I'd bring in a co-writer, Chris Gage.
Yeah.
So you would see, like, you can look at what anytime Chris Gage was coming in to be my co-writer and to help me get out more books, I was still doing the workload equivalent of 2.5 books by myself. And maybe they came out 2 months later and you didn't see it, or maybe there was a 0.1 or a free comic book day issue. But yeah, once I start passing 40 pages, I start like getting a little overwhelmed, and I'm like, I need some help. Everyone's got different speeds. Bendis can do it in his sleep. There are other writers like Donny Cates can juggle like 4 or 5 books. And
Tom Taylor is like
Tom. Everyone's different. And there comes a point where like people are like, well, why are you online so much? And I'm like, I'm online as much as you. I'm online as much as, and do you have a 9-to-5 job? Why are you online so much? that or why, you just wrote that you saw this movie this weekend. Yeah, you saw a movie too this weekend. So, I there's only so much time where if I try to write 24/7, my brain will melt.
Yeah.
So
You need a break.
there's only so much I'm going to do, and for my career, it's mainly been 2 books a month
Yeah.
and change.
I totally get that because like a lot of my job is conceptual. So like sometimes I'm just doing something else and then people are like, well, why aren't you working? And I'm like, trust me, I'm working.
That's not the way Tom Brevoort looks at it. Tom always looks at it as, what did you turn in? What's in my inbox? That's the work. You going over to that giant whiteboard and figuring out the next 12 issues, or where that thread goes in there, or you got that great idea that solved that problem, that doesn't count unless it's on the page.
Well,
That's the work.
because that's his job.
And, well, no. You gotta have that stuff in.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You mentioned writing the thing with, you had Andrea DeVito on it. That's a name that will come
So
up later in this interview. Uh,
yes.
did you have a particular affection for the thing? And what did it feel like when it got canceled?
Oh, that broke me. I was looking at my career in comics, and for the life of me, there have been times where there was only like one time where I was fired off of a book. But there have been times where the book ends, and then it's like there's nothing you can do. That was a time. I'd never been fired from a book at Marvel.
When were you fired off a book?
I was fired off of Batman Adventures, which I was
Really?
co-doing with Ty Templeton. I was fired from that. There was we were coming up to the end. We only had a few issues left, and I was doing an interview for like a website, and I was using it to promote that She-Hulk was coming out, and I was promoting some other things like maybe Spidey Torch. I was promoting a bunch of projects, and one of the projects I wanted to promote was that I was writing the finale for Batman Adventures, this big fun goodbye story, because the book was ending. And I asked editorial, can I mention this in the interview, because we hadn't announced that the book was ending. And I got a tentative, yeah, okay. And then I did the interview, and then the bigwigs at DC didn't know. So they suddenly, this interview goes live, and then, like gossip sites pull that nugget out and go, Dan Slott announces Batman Adventures is canceled. And the moment you announce a book is canceled, it's not like, you have a series finale of Seinfeld and the ratings go up. In comics, it's the opposite. If you tell people that a series is ending, they know, why should I follow that character? I'll buy that book. I don't want to read that thing that's coming to an end. It won't be important to the universe. So sales almost always go down when you tell everybody that a book is ending. So here I had just a freelancer had just made an announcement that DC hadn't announced yet. And they were mad. And they went, you know what, you're off the book. Oh, but I got permission. They asked the editor, did you tell him? And the editor, to be fair, went, yeah, I told them. But I didn't know it was going to read like that. And everyone was so mad. And people were talking like, maybe we can get you back on the book. And by the time it was all done, that felt bad. I'd never been fired off a book before.
So Ty had to continue that on his own?
Oh, yeah. And he did a great job. And he called me on the phone, and he was upset about it too. And even though officially I wasn't on the book, he batted ideas by me like we were still working on the book together. Because Ty's a stand-up guy. I actually had a problem with his last issue when he was pitching it to me. And I voiced my problem, and I was like, and we argued about it back and forth as if we were still co-writing the book. And in the end, he took the note, and the note made it into the story. So I
what was
wasn't
the issue?
efficient. He did his final issue of Batman Adventures was they'd never done a story in Adventures continuity where Joe Chill came
Yeah.
back to Gotham, where Batman got to meet Joe Chill. And Ty came up with this very clever story that Joe Chill, being like an out of towner, wasn't scared of Batman. To him, it's like a stupid idiot in a costume. But he was very scared of going back into Gotham because it was Bruce Wayne's city. And he knew he was the guy who killed the Waynes. He didn't want to go back to a city where the richest man in the city, who was this powerful force, would know he was there. But uncharacteristically, when he's dealing with the Batman, none of the fear tactics are working. He's just punching him like he's a guy. Batman's like, this guy's tough. And there's a bit where they're fighting and the mask gets ripped, and Joe Chill, he sees it's Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
And he won't take his hand, and he falls to his death. And Ty had a beat where Batman knew that was Joe Chill. And I said, no, Batman should never know that Joe Chill died. And he's like, why? He's like, that should always be a thing that haunts him. But the one guy he could never catch is the person who murdered his parents. He should never have that resolved. The reader can know, but Batman must never know that was Joe Chill who fell off that bridge. And we argued about it, and he went, okay, I'll split the difference and I'll do it your way. But, it's still the mask. And yeah, it's still Bruce Wayne that scares him. He knows it's fine if he dies knowing Batman was Bruce Wayne, but Batman should never know that was Joe Chill. So
that was you.
Logically, I was not supposed to make that call because I was off the book.
That was you. Whenever the whole issue of should Batman have been able to catch Joe Chill comes up, I point to that issue and I'm like, well, yes, he should be able to catch Joe Chill and not know.
He should never know.
And that was your idea.
That was my take. I
cool.
strongly believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. So back to the Thing. Yeah. Like.
But the Thing was devastating. Because I had the Thing. Like you can look at something like I did, like Superior Spider-Man, and you can see the seeds for it set in issue 600.
Yeah.
And how it doesn't pay off till 700. And you can see now with like the Reckoning War, you'll be able to see all these seeds I planted all over the place. I love doing that. When I was working on the Thing, I knew what I wanted Thing issue 25 to be, and I knew what I wanted Thing issue 50 to be. Like that's how far ahead I was planning, and all these things I wanted to do. Tom had told me working on the Thing, like, I wanted the Thing to propose to Alicia in issue 25. And I wanted to have them like married by 50 or married not that long after issue 25. And Tom told me, you can have the Thing propose in the book, The Thing. You can have the honeymoon in the Thing. You can have the bachelor party in the Thing. You can't have the wedding. If you have the Thing propose to Alicia, at that time it was JMS. Like JMS will do the wedding in Fantastic Four. You don't get, that's a Fantastic Four event. You don't get to do that. Are you okay with that? And I said, I am okay with that. And that's when I was writing the Thing. We never got close to it. We got canceled by issue. We knew we were going by issue 5. So it was going to be issue 6 or issue 8. And I just wanted to go as long as possible. So we went to issue 8 because I just loved working on the Thing. But the day I got Fantastic Four from Marvel, I said, you said the writer of Fantastic Four could marry Ben and Alicia. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, they're married. They're just getting married. I'm doing that. I am marrying Ben and Alicia. That was like the first. I had to get them back from where Jonathan Hickman had left them. But the second they got back, I was like, we're doing the marriage.
18
Second they're
years
back on
later.
Earth. Yeah, I'm like, boom, got that out of my system.
You're a patient man, Mr. Slott. Speaking of patience, in 2005, you first mentioned the Reckoning War in She-Hulk #3. What is that
We
like?
set we set it up earlier. You just we only mention it in 2005. There is a earlier setup. I think now we know. I think we can say it now that we're into it, which is because we've seen Choir the Silent Watcher be killed.
Yeah.
And that's from the court case from She-Hulk like 7 or 8 in the first run, where She-Hulk by working for the Magistrati in outer space, she sets up this planet where the Watchers can't see, where one Watcher goes there and they can never report back, and they can never enter what they have seen into the Cyclopedia Universum, and the Watchers will never know what happens on Obscura Minor. There is a dark sector of space that the Watchers can't see, and that's the proving ground. That's the foothold that the Reckoning have, where they can do stuff without the Watchers seeing them.
Yep. I realize like this is kind of what draws me to your work, is like you take concepts of a character that's always there, it's always been there. She-Hulk's a lawyer, but then the Watchers watch stuff, but then you take that and then you expand that into something else. She-Hulk is a lawyer for a cosmic court. The Watchers now have a planet that they cannot watch. Like, where do these ideas, like, this is the dumbest question an interviewer can ask. Where do these ideas come from?
There are all these people that have these different trite answers for that. Like, I think Harlan Ellison said that there's a man in Poughkeepsie that he sends a postcard to, and he sends him ideas. People used to ask me, like, where do you get your ideas from? And I used to put on my straightest of faces, and I used to go, drugs. And that's bad. That's no. The honest answer is that ideas come all the time. The trick is when you get them, writing them down. That's it. Because you'll get that great idea you had for something while you were walking down the street or in the supermarket or whatever. And it's your job to either have a little pad of paper with you. That's your job as a writer. Have that little pad of paper with you and you write it down. And then when it's time, when you need the ideas, you go to that pad of paper and you've got 800 ideas because you wrote them down when they popped into your head. And now there's no excuse, because now we've got these things and they've got voice memos. You get an idea, you don't even have to write it down. You just need to go, boop. Okay, Spider-Verse, a world where the Spider-Mobile, where it's like Cars, and the Spider-Mobile is alive and it's their Spider-Man, and his name is Peter Parked Car. You go there, and then it's there. And then you can listen to it later and you go, that is the stupidest effing idea I've ever heard. Or, oh, that's great. So that's all there is. Where do you get your ideas from? Ideas are everywhere. The idea for Superior Spider-Man came because, people say, oh, he works Marvel style. I don't work Marvel style. My Marvel style is different than Stan's. Mine is, I write every panel description out and what I want in every single panel. And then and there's no dialogue. And then that goes to the artist. And then I see what the artist draws, and then I tailor the dialogue. Unless there's a specific gag or a play on words or a thing that I really want to do, that full script will end up in the thing, but that's very rare. And a lot of times an artist might go, you broke this down into 4 panels. I want to make it 5. And I'll go, knock yourself out. You're the artist, you're the visual storyteller. You have a better handhold on that than I do. If you think it needs to go to 5, it probably has to go to 5. Or if you think my 5-panel page is too crowded, you know a way to make it to 4, I trust you. And then the art comes in, and then I dialogue it. That's in a world where everything's going great, is how I work. With Spider-Man 600, I'm writing the issue, and I'm getting all this gorgeous John Jr. art in, and there's the climactic scene where where Spider-Man puts on Doc Ock's brain helmet to take over all the machines that Doc Ock has taken over, and he puts his brain patterns in it, and he shuts the city down. And Doc Ock is like, no, and Doc Ock's attacking, and then Spider-Man uses it to even shut down Doc Ock's arms. It's like, when I wrote it, I thought it was cool. And then when the art came in and I looked at it and I went, oh my God, that's stupid. What was Spider-Man? Why are you doing that? You know that Doc Ock is dying. His body's wasting away. You know he's a mad scientist. And you've just put your brain into his brain helmet. Like, you've just given him your brainwave patterns. And oh my God, like, and hours before he dies, he will swap brains with you and you will die in his body. Don't you realize what you're doing? And I went, oh, that is good. And then I'm like, tick, 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 tick. So like, writing that story the second time to do the dialogue gave me the idea that eventually became Superior.
You found what was potentially a plot hole and you made it a storyline.
Well, yeah, because you got to play the ball where it lies.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? Throw out John Jr. artwork? No. No, but so you go like, so ideas come to you all the time, and they come from the strangest places, and you just write them down. That's all there is to it. You write it down so it's there for you when you need it. And also, you also need to have the wherewithal to go, I wrote down this idea. This is the idea I'm running with. Oh, this doesn't work. So, yeah. And also, it helps to have friends to bounce ideas off of, that can tell you when the ideas. Like, I have my pile of ideas that are 3 a.m. ideas that I have deep love and affection for them, and they feel inherently stupid, but I like them. And sometimes I need a friend to go, no, that was stupid.
It's your flaming
Like,
globes of Sigmund ideas.
I had this one where it was really early in the morning. I was running late on Spider-Man stuff, and Wacker was the senior editor, and Brevoort is above him. And this gives you a window into their editorial differences. Like, I have this idea while I'm working on this thing that I'm late on to go, what if Spider-Man got Pym particles? What if he grew to giant Spider-Man? And he could like box Fin Fang Foom. It would be awesome. Be this giant Spider-Man. And like, you could take all the classic Spider-Man covers where Spider-Man is giant, like Chaos, something like, where Spider-Man's like, beat yourself up for all I care. I'm out of here. And you could do that for real.
Yeah.
He'd be that big. Like, or someone like get their purse being snatched, and a giant Spider-Man would lean down and go, stop that. I thought this was brilliant. And I write this up and I send it to them. And Steve was like, Dan, that's a giant Spider-Man. That's a great idea. How's that plot coming? And Tom Brevoort was like, that is the stupidest effing idea I've ever heard. Get the plot done. And that's like the difference between the two of them. Someone needs to stop me sometimes. And giant Spider-Man was one of them.
Speaking of friends, in 2005, you took a history lesson for the dynamic between Spider-Man and the Human Torch with Ty Templeton. That is one of my favorite limited series ever. You went You went through the decades. What? How much did you enjoy working on that book with Ty?
I loved it. I went through every decade but the 90s. You notice we skip over the 90s?
Yeah. Well,
It's
Peter wasn't Spider-Man then.
he's gonna jump over that. No, that was a blast, man. Um, when I started working in comics, when I sold my first few stories, there is a point where everyone always tried to break into Marvel Comics Presents. That was such a treasure trove for young aspiring writers and artists. It was, even though it was a place where they forced you to buy it by having a Wolverine serial or a Ghost Rider serial. But then there'd be 2 to 3 other stories in there that you didn't want, where they got to try out new young writers and artists. You know, you don't like the drawings you did in kindergarten. Your mom might put it on the fridge, but as you do stuff and get better, you then look at that and you kind of feel embarrassed. That was Marvel Comics Presents. There's a lot of guys starting out, trying and failing and making readers pay, cover price for it. And the other thing it did was it would take characters like Shamrock or La Peregrine and put them on a cover with a trademark so you can keep those characters going. So every now and then they go, okay, you can write a story, but do one about one of these 8 characters we're about to lose the trademark on. Like, okay, I'll tell a story of Devil Slayer, you know, just whatever. Elf with a Gun, I'll do a story with them. That was Marvel Comics Presents. And at one point I was so desperate to break in there because that's regular work. And when you're starting out. But there was a point where when I was growing up, I knew the characters, but there was a certain point where when you're growing up, you go, I like Spider-Man when it's drawn by John Romita Sr. I like, this character when it's drawn by that guy, and you start recognizing the artists. And there's a point where I quickly realized that I loved Gil Kane. And if Gil Kane drew it, I didn't care if it was the Atom or Green Lantern, even though like I liked him from Spider-Man, but I'm like, I will follow Gil Kane anywhere and read any Gil Kane book. And there is a point where one of the earliest stories I sold was I sold them a Two Gun Kid story to Marvel Comics Presents. And this is around the time Gil Kane was still alive. And the editor, Terry Cavanaugh, said, Gil Kane's around. Would you like it if we got Gil Kane to do your Two Gun Kid story? And I was like, yeah. And I got it. I got an 8-page Two Gun Kid story drawn by Gil Kane. And the second that happened, I was like, I'm good. I'm good to go. If they can me tomorrow, if I don't wind up selling another story, I did a Two Gun Kid story with Gil Kane. Bam. Boom. By the time I came back in 2004, here I did She-Hulk, and I knew I was going to have court cases with other heroes. And in my mind, I was thinking, I'm never going to get to write Spider-Man. He's like their flagship character. There's JMS is over here, and Bendis is over there, and Fraction's over there, and I'm never going to get a chance to work on this character. But I can have him guest star in She-Hulk. So it's like when I did She-Hulk 4, I put everything in the kitchen sink in there. I treated that like my Gil Kane Two Gun Kid story. If this is my one shot, I get to write Spider-Man, I'm putting everything in She-Hulk #4 and getting that out of my system. And that issue came out, and that was great. And I was pitching some stuff to Tom, and I offhandedly pitched him like Spidey Torch, and he was like, we'd buy that. And I'm like, oh my God, I get to do Spider-Man Human Torch. So yeah, I wanted to do every single era. I wanted to have all my favorite villains. I wanted to you know, Spidey and the Torch take on Doc Doom. I wanted, you know, Craven to show up, and I want, you know, but everything. Um, so yeah, those 5 issues just became everything in the kitchen sink issues, and
Yeah.
just get, you know, I'm going to get that all out of my system, and yeah, that was one of those things where after Spidey Torch was done, I was like, I'm good. If I never get to work on Spider-Man again, I'm good.
You
Um,
you did a time
yeah.
capsule of every era.
And Spider-Man was unmasking himself every week
Yeah.
to everybody. And Brian and Mark Miller and a couple of guys who were the big cheeses at that time on the writing level, they had a kind of ethos that the Marvel Universe, all these characters that had been around for a while, that they all knew who each other were. It was like a giant fraternity. So there'd be like a scene with just a bunch of them walking in the park out of costume. It's Peter hanging out with Reed, hanging out with Luke Cage, hanging out with Matt Murdock. And they're all just standing around talking like they all know all of their secrets. And when I grew up, you kept in your head which characters knew which secret identities. And it was locked solid. Like you get into like really late issues of the Avengers with Stern, and you would realize Janet Van Dyne didn't know Tony Stark was Iron Man. She'd been with him all this time. She never knew. Now, in the Bendis Mark Miller world,
They
of
all know.
course they know.
Yeah.
But for comic geeks like us, we have these insane charts in our heads where we know who knows what secret identity and what this elaborate thing is, you know? And I was working away on the Spidey Torch story, and I knew my big reveal was going to be Spidey finally tells his secret identity to Johnny. That was going to be the long arc of all 5 issues. You were going to get to see the history of these 2 characters who are like brothers from their high school era all the way up to modern times. All the trials and tribulations, all the ways they pranked each other, all the ways they supported each other. And you were going to see this bond growing. And then the final reveal, the big payoff in issue 5 was, I will let you into my world. And then we see Mary Jane and Aunt May and them having like Thanksgiving with the Richards family. And we see like but that was going to be the big payoff. And I remember this issue in New Avengers where just Pete's walking down the street talking with Reed and Luke Cage out of costume. And I was like, what the, you know, but then I was like, you know what? I'm going to fold it into my story. So there's that scene where Johnny's like, who knew?
Reed.
And Pete starts counting off on his fingers. And when he gets to Reed, Johnny is like, Reed! Reed knew. I didn't know, but Reed knew. And that was fun. That was fun. You have to play the ball where it lands.
One of the things I really liked about that series is like you guys went back and forth between like really emotional drama and really great comedy, like at this, you know, at the drop of a hat. So like you'd have that scene where they're talking about the Spider-Mobile and it would be ridiculous, and then all of a sudden Peter's talking about Gwen, and the way Ty draws it is like it's in shadow and it's and then all of a sudden Johnny's get really sad. Yeah.
I one of the things I was looking at when I was working on Spidey Torch was all the ways they had connected, all the different storylines where they were hanging out with each other, and those Spider-Mobile stories were wonderful because you just cut to Pete and Johnny working on it together, 2 friends working on a car. And I couldn't let that go. And when you looked at the timeline, that was right around the time Gwen died.
Yeah.
Here you have Gwen dying and the ludicrousness of we're building a Spider-Mobile. And I went, if I need these two guys to bond over something in the most male way possible, it's going to be working on a car. And here I have the greatest thing they can bond over. You know, the trick was doing it in such a way where it didn't give away Pete's secret identity, of him being able to say that, but then we ghost the image of Gwen, or we had him dealing with Gwen earlier, talking to her on the bridge. Yeah, that was great. Now, I couldn't have done half the stuff we did in that book without Ty Templeton being there and being so good and just the master of his craft. Love Ty.
Speaking of playing the ball where it lies, you know, at the end of issue 5 of that, you do have Mary Jane. I think a lot of people think you don't like Mary Jane, but I think if they
love Mary Jane,
I think if you read, issue 5 of Spidey Torch, it's pretty obvious that you do. But of course, the reason people think that you don't is because,
or if you read like Renew Your Vows, or you read the climax of Spider Island, with the two of them back to back on the Empire State Building, working together, and she whispers, "I love you." I love Mary Jane. When I got the assignment to write Spider-Man,
Brand New Day,
I was told about One More Day.
Yeah.
And I was told the assignment about Brand New Day. If there is an alternate universe where I went in and the editor-in-chief, said, "Here's the assignment. We're doing this book called Monkey Unicorn. Spider-Man's gonna make his best friend's gonna be a monkey and he's gonna ride a unicorn. And you've got to work that into every issue." I would be like, "Thank you, sir. Could I have another? I'm gonna write the best damn Spider-Man best friends with a monkey riding a unicorn comic that has ever been." So you don't say no to Spider-Man. And there are all these fans who are like, "You should have written them back together." No one's gonna do that. No one's the editor-in-chief and the powers that be have decided they want this, that this is where they want Spider-Man status quo to be. And here's why they believe this. And your assignment is, if you write this book, this is your status quo. And I'm like, I'm great with that. You get to write Amazing Spider-Man, but he moves to LA. Sign me up. You get to write Amazing Spider-Man, but he's a mass murderer. Well, that I probably wouldn't do. But there's certain, we all have our, and I don't see that as the end all be all of Spider-Man. Spider-Man existed for for a long time without Mary Jane being in the book. Spider-Man, there were times where they wrote Mary Jane out of the book completely, and you had long runs of Spider-Man. When they married Spider-Man and Peter Parker and Mary Jane, they married them in the newspaper strip. They did a big promotional thing in at a Mets baseball game. They married them during like the pre-show or the halftime. It got nationwide exposure, and Marvel Comics suddenly went, "Oh my God, this is a thing." Marvel Comics weren't planning on doing it. The issues that J.M. DeMatteis wrote for Kraven's Last Hunt, they had to go in and rewrite it because it originally wasn't written where they were a married couple. That got a rewrite. Like his first version of that never would have dealt with them being a married couple. And people point to that all the time as being one of the best married Spider-Man stories. The original version, they weren't married in it. They did a rewrite because the marriage was shoehorned into the book super fast. They quickly, you can read some issues right before the proposal where she accepts, and right before they get married, where Pete's sleeping with the black cat. And there's like a knock on the door. And it's Mary Jane, and Pete's like annoyed. It's like, "I got black cat in my bed. Like, can you shoot? Can you get out of here?" This is clearly not a thing they were planning to do in the long run. And then they did the marriage. And then now that's the rule. And if I had become a writer during that time period, I would have happily written married Spider-Man.
Because you got to play the ball where
Um,
it lies.
you got to play the ball where it lies. And my take, we were told, if you want Pete to marry, if you want Peter Parker to date Mary Jane again, he can. They just can't get married. And part of me, and I think a lot of the team, the Brand New Day team, felt that you've just had 25 years of them being married, and now they're not married. So the idea of them dating seems like a step down. It feels like they're dating, but you know they can't get married. Let's try something new. Let's try Pete dating different people. Let's throw in complications if Mary Jane comes back. You know, but that's all. It's very weird to me. Mary Jane.
I'll tell you a couple of things. In 2000, I stopped reading comics for the most part, and then so all of the stuff that I've been talking to you about, I actually came back to later. The reason I came back to Marvel comics is because of your first Brand New Day story with Marcos Martin. Because one, I saw it, and I was like, "Who is this Marcos Martin guy? He is amazing." And then I read it, and then I just got addicted to your Spider-Man stuff. Like, what's more
Marcos,
on Screwball?
There have been times where, because clearly Marcos and I don't work on everything together, but there'll be times where I am locked on a story and I don't know how to fix it. And Marcos, he lives half a world away in Barcelona. And so when I'm up at like 3 a.m, he's already up and working. And I will Skype him and I will run something by him like, how do I fix this? And he'll see it the way an artist would see it. And then he'll throw out a suggestion. I go, oh, that works so much better. Yeah. You know, or I'll bounce stuff by him because he'll be up. I would work with Marcos Martin on everything. I love working with Marcos. Every time I've gotten him back for something, it has been me tempting him, you know, calling him on the phone and going like, how'd you like to do a Conan story? You know, like they just asked me if I want to do a short Conan story. And they're like, I would like to take off that box. I know, me too. Let's do a Conan story. What are we doing? What do you want to do? You know, so I got him. I knew Spider-Man 801 was going to be my last issue of Amazing.
Oh, it's
and
amazing. It's great.
I banked that story for years. And I got Marcos to promise that he would draw my last Spider-Man story. And I gave him that story with all the time in the world, knowing that it was going to be my last. There was a point we were at a Marvel retreat and we pulled over a smaller group to just talk about Spider-Man stuff. And Brian was walking us through an idea he had for a Miles story. And I was like, no, you can't tell that story. He's like, why? I'm like, that is almost beat for beat my last Spider-Man story. And Brian's like, you have the last Spider-Man story? I'm like, yeah, Marcos Martin has it. He's already done breakdowns. He will go to finishes eventually. It's in a drawer. And we came back. All the smaller groups went back into the bigger group. And Brian went, hey, everybody, you got to hear Dan's last Spider-Man story. And he made me tell it in front of the whole room. And we got a nice little golf clap from everybody. And I shut up.
It's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Brian's
yeah.
nice.
Because that's another thing I have to thank you for, because like all of this stuff with Brand New Day, I actually met a bunch of friends online because of it, and I'm still friends with them. My friend Paul in particular says hi and wants to tell you he's a big fan of yours. And I just thought that, especially as good as Brand New Day was, I really liked the way that you went on Big Time. How did you get that assignment over everyone else who was working on Spider-Man at the time? I'm sure everyone pitched.
I was on the brand new day team, the first brand new day team, and then eventually we shed the other three guys. Not through like combat or anything, just through
Oh,
like, okay, it was more like guys going like, okay, this is my station, I'm getting off. Okay, see you guys. And I was the guy that like gripped on and would not let go. And everyone's like, aren't you tired? Because the machinery of doing it 3 times a month, and all the baton passing, like a relay race, and then setting up other people's subplots, and paying off other things, and having summits, and having long Google chats, and having like everything being on these email chains that went on forever. It was way harder than just writing. If you were a guy writing a one book a month, um, and the process of it all would grind people's gears. And we shed three guys, and then we brought on three more. And my take was I'd been on the longest. Like, I knew the book was we there was a point where we knew after around like 100 issues that the experiment would be over, and we'd go down to two a month and a satellite book, which I think was Avenging Spider-Man.
yeah.
Um, and we knew that was going to be the outcome. And I looked at the big picture, and I love working on Spider-Man. I never wanted to stop working on Spider-Man. Um, and I felt in my heart that Joe Kelly, who was one of the team, was hitting the ball the best. Like, I put myself in Steve Wacker's shoes and went, if I was the editor and I knew I was going down to one guy, in my mind, my imaginary mind, of where I'm imaginarily Steve Wacker, I thought like, well, I would pick Joe Kelly, or I would scrap everybody and like call up Matt Fraction or Ed Brubaker and say, hey, do you guys want to do this? And not use any of those guys from the grinding out Spider-Man 3 times a month, experiment. Like, they'd had their time. They took their best shots. Um, so I saw the ride as coming to an end, and I asked Steve if he could do a lunch. And we went to a lunch, and I brought this big yellow legal pad, and I made this presentation, and it was like in a karaoke bar kind of restaurant where there's like weird images, music and images that don't go to music, like dolphins and
Yeah.
bunnies running through daffodils and shit. And I was just like, and I'm pitching for my life, because what I was pitching for was I was making the pitch that I wanted to be the guy on Avenging Spider-Man. If you go down to 2 books in a satellite, I want to jump into that lifeboat. Um, and Steve stopped me in the middle of my pitch and went, "No, I don't want you on Avenging Spider-Man." And the minute he said that, I was like, I was crushed. I was like, the ride's over. It's done. Those were my Spider-Man years, and I never got to be the guy. I got to be the guy on 2 different teams. Um, and then he said, "I want you on the lead book." I was like, "What?" And he said, "Here's the deal. You can't do this and Avengers. You have to give up Avengers." Um, and I said I had to think about it. I don't know who made my mouth say those words, but that's what came out of my mouth. And Steve said, okay. And he started walking back to Marvel. And I started walking back home. And I called my dad up on my cell, and I was like, I told him the offer I'd just gotten. And he went, "Are you crazy? You've always wanted to write Spider-Man. What are you doing?" And I went, "Oh my God, you're right." And I called Steve, and it was before he'd even made it to the door at Marvel. I was like, "I'll do it. I'll drop Avengers. I'll do it. Just fighting twice a month." So then that became it. Then it was all Spider-Man all the time.
I like
That went on 8 more years.
yeah, I think you have the record, don't you?
I have the record for amazing. I think Brian beats me because of all the years he did Ultimate Spider-Man with Bagley, and they were just machines together. That book
Hmm.
came out like 18 issues a year, a lot. Um, and Brian was done like lots of 6-issue arcs, but those were every story he told was like another 6 issues on the fire. So
Yeah.
you add all that up, and he did the Spider-Man team up book for a while during Ultimates. Um,
All the Avengers books
yeah,
that Spider-Man is in.
I think for solo person who's written solo Peter Parker stories, I think Brian has the top seat. I think I come in at number 2, but the difference, the shaving, is I've written more issues of Amazing Spider-Man than anybody.
Which is the main
I
book, so
wrote
you
a lot.
win.
Nah, it's all good. It's all good. Um, yeah, and even if there's a world where somehow I came back to Spider-Man and I started writing it for a while, I still don't think you can beat Brian, because he wrote Avengers for 8 years with Spider-Man on it. So I think you'd have to slap another 8 years on top of anything else for who's the guy that's written the most Spider-Man ever in the history of mankind. I think it still goes to Brian Michael Bendis.
So here's the thing, Dan. I think
Yeah.
that you and Brian, and I think I'd give it to you. I think you and Brian are the two most important Spider-Man writers of the 21st century. And here's my case for it. So
Okay.
I feel that Brian, with Ultimate Spider-Man,
Mhm.
redefined Spider-Man for a generation. Right?
Boom. I'm with you.
But you have introduced so many elements, new elements to Spider-Man that have stuck. And
Like Miles Morales.
well, yes, he also has Miles Morales. Okay, he might win. So
He created Miles Morales. Well,
so
he co-created with Sarah Pacelli.
so you have Mr. Negative, you have Screwball, you have you introduced Spider Island.
Screwball, the character that every PlayStation 4 user in the world hates because of those damn Screwball missions.
I
They're,
know.
God, they hate Screwball so much.
I was playing it. I was playing it and I was like, and Screwball is the most annoying character in the world. And I actually said out loud, she's so annoying. That's so
Yeah,
awesome.
the most hated character. You know, throwing Gwen Stacy off a bridge does not compare to the man hours that you spent trying to stop that. You're like, throw 8 Gwen Stacy off bridges. It doesn't matter, because all that Screwball in those missions. God, we hate her.
But you also did Superior,
Yeah,
and lest we forget Spider-Verse, which is kind of a big thing
Spider-Verse
right now.
kind of is. I'm, but even then you gotta parse it. You gotta parse it a bit, where you go. The idea for Spider-Verse came because I worked on a Beanox video game called Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions.
Yeah.
Where it was the Spider-Man, the Peter Parkers of 4 different worlds, and Miles Morales, and
2099.
2099, Miguel O'Hara.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah. So 3 Peter Parkers and a Miguel O'Hara having adventures. And it bugged me because of the game mechanic that they never teamed up except in the cutscenes. And when I was first shown the game, and they said, "Can you come up with a story for this?" I was looking at all the development work and all the stuff, and I was blown away. And this was in Quebec, and I called Steve Wacker from Canada, and I was like, "We need to do this in the comics, but we need to do what they can't do. We need to have all, not just 4 guys, every Spider-Man ever. I want every Spider-Man we can possibly put in a giant adventure. I want, and Spider-Ham. I fought like a demon to get Spider-Ham in the Shattered Dimensions video game. That was the biggest fight I had working with those people. They made this amazing game, and I fought like hell to get Spider-Ham references in the beginning, and in the very end have a post-credit kind of like Ferris Bueller walking out of the bathroom sequence with Spider-Ham. And they were like, you are insane. We would have to build a whole new figure for that. We would have to animate it for a cut scene. And our people have done charts and graphs to prove to you that most people don't finish games. So you want us to build a figure for the end of a game that maybe 20% of our people are going to finish, and then get to the end of the credits and see this scene. And I would not stand down. I was like, this is important. And we had a comic convention where they unveiled it to a crowd, and the minute there was the first Spider-Ham reference, the crowd lost their shit. And then every question they got in the Q&A section was, is Spider-Ham in the game? Is Spider-Ham in the game? Are you going to do anything with Spider-Ham? And when we were all backstage, they all started hugging me, all the developers, going like, thank you. You're the man. You understand these people. They're your people, and thank you for making us stick Spider-Ham in that end scene. So I knew I wanted to do that, but what I didn't know the secret origins of the game, which I have now found out over time, which is there is the 1990s cartoon. There is a storyline called Spider Wars, where Spider-Man meets alternate versions of himself. And one of the people who worked on that animated episode went on to work for Beanox in the development of Shattered Dimensions. So if you do the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, the guy who wrote the original episodes for that, John Semper, inspired a guy working under him who then went to Beanox and went to that. And so the thing I can look at and I can go, I created the name Spider-Verse. I created a giant event with every Spider-Man ever, including all the guys that aren't Peter Parker, including the Spider-Hams, of the world. And even though, this is tricky. Originally, Spider-Verse was going to happen a year earlier, and editorial decided to move it a year later. So there is a lot of Spider-Verse in the drawer. So we didn't have an Edge of Spider-Verse mini originally.
You were this close to not having Spider-Gwen.
No, because I had written Spider-Gwen into the first issue or two of Spider-Verse. There was always going to be a Gwen Stacy who was a Spider-Woman. That was in the original Spider-Verse. And I have described in other interviews what she was going to look like. And some fan on a DeviantArt page drew a picture of what they thought I meant in my head, and they posted that picture somewhere. And then online they asked me, is that what you look like? And being a mensch, I went, sure. Yeah, sure. And then this has gone on through the magic of the internet to be the actual drawing of what she was going to look like. And people hate it, and I'm an idiot. So, because it's the internet. But what happened was Jason, Robbie, and Rico, the guys who are the true fathers of Spider-Gwen, they made a pitch for the Edge of Spider-Verse book called Spider-Ben, about a world where Uncle Ben became Spider-Man. And I put my foot down, and I said, they cannot tell that story. because halfway into Spider-Verse, we were going to pull a curtain behind, and you were going to see the world where Uncle Ben became Spider-Man, and that was going to be an important part of the Spider-Verse saga. And I said I did not want to tip that card early. And I knew exactly who I wanted the Uncle Ben Spider-Man to be. And Nick Lowe, the editor, was like, well, these guys made a really good pitch. You know, we really like their Spider-Man pitch. We like the art. We like the creative team. And I said, well, they can't do Spider-Man. I was like, tell you what, I don't have a backstory for Spider-Gwen. Offer them Spider-Gwen. You know, it'll be fun. Flesh her out. Have them go off and do their Edge of Spider-Verse issue with Spider-Gwen. And Nick Lowe said, I will take that under consideration. And Nick Lowe went back to that team and gave them a list. And he said, here's characters you can do. And top of the list was Spider-Gwen. And they went, oh, we'll take Spider-Gwen. And then they designed the costume. They came up with Earth 65, like everything about it. They came up with her whole history and her look and her feel. That's them. There was always going to be a Spider-Gwen, but it wasn't going to be that Spider-Gwen. And that Spider-Gwen is where the magic comes from, is Robbie, Rico, and Jason. That's the magic. And suddenly, because of them and doing such a phenomenal job and the best costume design any character has had in the past couple decades.
Oh yeah.
And all the goodwill that came from that one issue. I had to change Spider-Verse. She was going to die. I was going to kill her. The original Spider-Gwen that I had that was nothing like theirs was going to have a very heroic and noble sacrifice to save everyone. She was going to fight off a horde of goblins and save the day and get everyone safe passage and sacrifice herself in a very, it was going to be a death with like 1,000 times the agency. This wasn't going to be a girl thrown from the bridge. This was going to be the girl who held the bridge and fought off 1,000 goblins. And suddenly I couldn't do that because this was now the most popular character in the universe. So I had to like drastically change elements. I had to keep changing so much of Spider-Verse on the fly because of so many different factors. It was a very tricky book to write because our artists were going at different speeds and I had to keep them fed at different times. So I was writing. There were no 2 issues of Spider-Verse that were written in a row.
Really?
Yeah. It was all plotted completely out of sequence so that artists could keep drawing.
Was that hard to do?
And yeah. But it was all scripted in sequence. So when you're scripting, you can spackle over things that are confusing. And you can fix things on the fly. So it was plotted completely out of sequence. There was also a Bible for the other spider writers, the people who were taking part in doing miniseries about your spider gets to play with this element and they need to get the ball this far up the field by so-and-so. This could do other than this. And I'm not going to name names, but there was one spider writer who would not follow the Bible. There was like 1 or 2 rules in the Bible and they didn't follow it. And because of that, here I am writing the lead story. I was suddenly going, now I have to have these characters go over here and do this because this guy didn't follow the rules. Now I have to do this, and Marvel needs that, and you need that, and this needs to be written out of this. I am amazed at how that all came out. I'm very happy. I am very proud of it. Everyone did a lot of hard work. It was very hard work from everybody. Everyone working on the minis, everyone working on the art. Giuseppe Camicoli, Olivier Coipel, Justin Bonzer, everybody working on it just killed themselves. And it was a New York Times best-selling collection. It then went on to get a cartoon based on it, like a whole era of one of the Marvel cartoons. did a whole Spider-Verse run, and then it became a movie. So but it became a movie that was very much based on Spider-Man by Bendis, but it's got Spider-Gwen, Penny Parker, Spider-Ham, Spider-Man Noir, and Miles running around having adventures in alternate dimensions.
Yeah.
I can
See,
I
that's
feel
what I mean. The
okay.
two of you are the most important Spider-Man writers of the 21st century.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. But I look at that and I go, oh my God, so many of the best beats are the Spider-Man beats and the Miles beats, and I'm not an idiot. I look at that and I go, but at the same time, it's weird to me that people go. There'll be some people online who go like, oh, Spider Verse, it's like all with the vampires and they're killing everybody, and oh, I like the movie so much more. They're different things, and the
Yeah.
movie has millions of dollars with it, and like hundreds and thousands of people working on it, and from people doing hair design to like like cast of thousands, and some of the best Hollywood writers, Lord and Miller, working on this beautiful movie, Oscar winning movie, and developing it over like years, and we're writing everything out of sequence and we're slapping everything together, and we're like, oh geez,
Yeah.
let's put them on the cosmic scales together. Just very silly to me. I'm very proud of everything we did. And that said, it is like that and Spider-Man 2 are like my favorite superhero movies of all time.
Really?
I have watched Spider-Verse an ungodly amount of times. I've seen every possible version of the movie. Like I've seen it in IMAX, in 3D, in IMAX 3D, in 4DX, in Dolby. I made sure I saw every variation. Like the best version is Dolby.
Hmm.
Oh, it's beautiful. Um, and I watched it a zillion times at home. Um, I love it to bits. I mean, there was a time where I was like, I'm feeling down. What do I do? I'll go see Spider Verse again because it's the best. It's the best movie. It's so good.
I'll tell you something, Dan. There are a couple of I made this switch to trades like some years ago, but
Mm.
there are a few comics that I was glad to have bought in singles and read in singles, and two of them are yours.
Oh,
The first one is Amazing Spider-Man number 655, which like I read that off the stands and it made such an impact. What an amazing issue. Like it's silent for the first half and then it's
oh,
completely surreal for the second. What was that like seeing that art come in and all of that?
oh God! Whenever I see Marcos Martin art come in, I'm always blown away. Um, there are little touches in that where I'd make like a note in the plot, but the way he structures is so much better. Um, there are certain elements that like when he did that whole like Escher like landscape of Gwen Walk, that's Marcos Martin. Like it, the way I write it, it's just like he's going through a crowd, you know, um, to try to get her. But then when you see that page, you're like, oh, that's so beautiful. Um, the scene where he's chasing down the burglar, in my mind, it was like a stretching hallway that never ended. But then he did that spiral all the
Yeah.
way into Uncle Ben. That's Marcos Martin. Um, but like little bits where J. Jonah Jameson gets up and the other half of the bed isn't slept in, and then he goes to the vanity, and all of her and it's clearly a vanity for two, and all of her stuff is still laid out. That's in the plot. So there's there's little bits and pieces where I go like, yeah, okay, I'm in here, I'm good. But oh my God, when Marcos goes off on his own and using the dreamscape, anytime something's way too violent or disgusting, that's me usually twisting Marcos's arm because he doesn't like drawing that.
Really?
So like the Gwen Stacy with her neck broken hanging to the side, that's probably me. Like when we did all the stuff in the Mysterioso arc with all the
Yeah.
dead guys and all the blood, he did not want to draw that. He does not like that stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh man, I love him so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another issue that I loved reading off the stands, to the point where I immediately read it again once I finished it. I think you know what I'm gonna say, is 698.
Oh, 698 with Richard Elson. Yeah. When I did that issue, because we knew we were building up to the Doc Ock mind swap. When I wrote that issue and I turned it in, Tom Brevoort's someone who's usually very hard to please. It's kind of hard to get the thumbs up from him, or to surprise him. And he said something, and I know he meant it to be funny, but when I turned in 698, he went, "You can coast. From here on out, you can just coast. You got it." No, you never coast. You never ever coast. But that was like a very big compliment from him, which meant that, like, yeah, you hit the ball just right on this one. I was very happy with 698.
Yeah, the twist caught me completely off guard, to the point
Good.
where the moment I finished it, I read it again.
No, that was fun. That was the magic trick, and it's fun to pull stuff like that off. Um, there sometimes you do an issue and you put a lot of work into it, and then people don't appreciate it at all. And then sometimes you jam out an issue because you're under a deadline, and people go, "Oh, I love that," and you're like, it's frustrating. Um, and it's really not the best feeling is when you put all the love and effort into it and then people go, "That's my favorite." And 698 is one of those. Like, the two-parter, I Killed Tomorrow,
Yeah.
was a tough one to make work. And I'm like, a lot of times I want everyone, like, read that again. Everyone needs to read that again. The one where he has the newspaper that tells him everything that happens tomorrow. I was like, I loved every bit of that setup and everything we did with it.
Yeah.
And the cliff and the mid issue cliffhanger is great in that. Sometimes you put together the puzzle and you're way too pleased with yourself, and then people don't appreciate it.
Well,
You're like, oh man.
I thought that was a really solid two-parter, because that was when I was like, you could. That was when I realized, like, you could go and up the stakes, and it doesn't need to be a line-wide event, or you can just do that story. But speaking of a line-wide event, I guess, what did you think of fan reaction to Superior Spider-Man? Because I felt like this could go in all directions.
It's weird. I've done like an interview or two this week where, like, so I'm in a weird way, I'm kind of like talked out on that. But
Yeah, I'll keep this
the
brief.
thing I'll say, the thing about Superior was, there was a point where Tom said to me, because we knew it was going to cause furor once it started. We knew, you know, when you go to the comic shop and you have your favorite book, and you have a book that's part of your routine, like, that's your book. Like, you love New Mutants and you pick up every issue of New Mutants and you love these characters and you know every single thing about them. And you bought all the action figures, and that's that's you chose that book. When someone messes with the lineup or someone kills a character or someone, you get upset. You like having your comfort food. You like going to that fast food restaurant every week and you like ordering Big Macs. And Big Mac is that's your burger of choice. And we knew when we were doing Superior Spider-Man that Amazing Spider-Man is, for so many people, it's their comfort food. It's they check in, they get their Big Mac, they eat their Big Mac. Did it taste like a Big Mac? Yes, it did. And they're happy. And what we were doing was, we were going, you know what? We're not putting out Big Macs anymore. Big Mac is over. We took it away. But you like McRib, right? It's weird. It's for a limited time only. We're only going to make McRib now. And people lost their shit. They just, like, what? I want my Big Mac. This is what I'm here for. I am here for this thing. And you have changed it. I don't want McRib. And Brevoort told me, he's like, the moment you'll know you won, is the moment you say we're taking away McRib. If people go, but I like McRib, that's when you know you won. When
And
people go like, no, don't put Peter back. I want more Ock. And we got it. We got that in spades. We got that, like, people going, well, can't it go on longer? Or suddenly all these weird comic book conspiracy myths of they forced them to put Peter Parker back. Slott had to rush the ending. Slott had to rush it. He didn't want to do that. We knew exactly when we were putting Peter Parker back. It was called The Amazing Spider-Man 2. It was a major motion picture. There was going to be posters and advertising and everything. And when I went into the initial meetings to pitch a Superior Spider-Man at the Marvel Retreats, that was my pitch. We kill Peter Parker in Amazing Spider-Man 700 and stop producing Amazing Spider-Man. People will go insane. And then we do Superior Spider-Man. This is what we're going to do. When do we put him back? We put him back right the months before the movie comes out. That was always going to be the plan.
I couldn't believe you
And
did that. I couldn't believe you did that. Yeah.
That was always the plan. And people were, there were people at Marvel who were like, I don't know if you can keep going that long.
Yeah.
And there was a number of people who are like, maybe it should be a 6-issue arc. And I'm like, no, we're riding this for like a year and a half. We're going to do this block of time, and we're going to build this wide spanning story with all these different pieces. And here's where we introduce the love interest, and here's where we do this, and here's where Ghost Pete dies, and now it's Doc Ock all the time, and here's where he blackmails Jameson, and blah 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 blah. We had it all worked out.
I couldn't believe you did that, because so after 800 came out, I was in the comic book store buying some other comics. Some dude comes in and I hear him go up to the teller and says something like, do you still have a copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 800? And
700.
like, oh, 700. Yeah. Do
Yeah.
you still have a copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 700? And then, they're like, no, it's all sold out. It's like, what? But no, it's the very last appearance ever of Peter Parker. and me in my, I was 10 years old when they killed Superman, and I knew he wasn't going to stay dead. So I was like,
yeah,
look at this rube. Like, there's like, I can't believe he fell for it. But then you guys started doing Superior, and I think 12 issues in, I was like, is Dan Slott actually going to carry this out until the start, until Amazing Spider-Man 2? There's no way. It's too long. Twice a month?
Yeah.
Twice a month for it? There's no way. And then you did. I was like, you got to be kidding me. He did it.
We had so many people who honestly felt he was not coming back. We had so much mail.
How?
We had,
I don't get it.
We had one guy who wrote in. He's like, I have 2 boys. I named them Peter and Parker, and you have made their names meaningless. We had like some of the craziest. We had this one, like a father and son. The son's name was Max. They lived in New Jersey, and they wrote us this letter, and I loved the letter. And eventually, I did a signing in New Jersey, and I met them. And Max was old enough to like Spider-Man, but too young to read. And he and his dad read Spider-Man together. The dad would put Max on his lap. He would hold out the book. He would read it and do the voices. And Max would get to flip the page. And they get to the end of 700, and the dad gets up and loses his shit. And the dad's like, how could they do that? How could they end Amazing Spider-Man like this? How could, And he's freaking out. And little Max tugs his dad's sleeve. And then he goes, what? And little Max, not old enough to read, goes, Daddy, it's okay. Spider-Man's going to be fine. Like the little kid knew.
Seriously.
The little kid knew. Yeah. So it's you never know. You never know who's gonna. We like one of the things I like telling is our letterer had up the issue with Massacre
Yeah.
where he pulls out the gun and he shoots him in the face. Um, and he had that page up on his computer while he was lettering it. And his little son walked by, and his little son looked up and saw it and had a meltdown, going, "Spider-Man doesn't do that. Spider-Man doesn't do that." And then 6 weeks later, that book's on the stands. And on the internet, we had grown men going, "Spider-Man doesn't do that." And I'm like, it's the exact same vein.
Yeah.
It's like it depends on who you are and how much you buy into this. We had a guy for 700. Remember, this came out around Christmas time. We had a guy in the middle of America, like in the snow, and he had an oil drum where he had like a fire going. And he's a grown man with a beard, and he was filming himself because he's saying like, "This broke me. Like you don't do this to Spider-Man." And he was ripping up 700 and burning it in the oil drum. And he made certain to pick up the camera and film the last page getting burned. Like, "I'm done with Spider-Man. This is how you end it. Doc Ock wins." So grown men were upset. And we didn't do it to upset people. We did tell a great story. There's a whole like community online are like, they write Spider-Man to infuriate us, knowing that we'll come back. Like angry clicks will is why they do it. No, you're right to tell the best story. And sometimes when you're telling a story, the hero loses for a while, or bad things happen to good people.
I mean,
You just got to
Spider-Man
stick it
losing
through.
the Doc Ock and then coming back is one of the first ever Spider-Man stories.
Thank you. It's weird. There's is it the Five Rivers show or the Four Rivers show? There's a show we have way down on the south side of Manhattan, and one year, I want to say Midtown Comics had a booth there, and for their booth, they wanted to have this fun thing where every hour they had a different creator sign. And they said, "Will you come down and sign?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll come down and sign for an hour." Tom King will do another hour, and so on and so on. And I had finished my hour, and I'm heading off, and this fan comes running up, and he's got a stack of books. He's like, "Mr. Slott, I just missed you. Can you sign my books?" And I'm like, "Sure." So we go over to a table, and I'm signing through his stack, and he's talking to me while I'm signing, and he's going, "I owe you an apology." My wife's like, "I was someone who's been very mean to you online throughout all of Superior Spider-Man. I was really angry at first, but then by the end of the story, it became one of my favorite Spider-Man stories of all time. This is like, I love Superior Spider-Man, and I should have just let the story go where it was going and have faith. You taught me and he actually said, like, "You taught me a valuable lesson to wait to the end of the story." And while I'm signing, I say to the guy, like, just kind of looking up a little, like, "Oh, thank you." I'm like, "What do you think of Nick Spencer's Captain America, Hydra Cap?" And he goes, "Fuck Nick Spencer, fuck Hydra Cap." Same guy. Mwah.
I don't get it.
I knew it was coming. I was just teeing it up. He did it. It was like, God bless. And it's always got to be that way, And to be fair, I'm that guy. We're all that guy in different ways. Like, I remember being on staff when they were doing Civil War, and then finding out that Spider-Man was going to reveal his secret identity. And I was like, "What the hell is this?" Because now it's the first time I'm hearing it. And I wasn't working on Spider-Man at the time. I was working on She-Hulk. I was like, they can't do that to Spider-Man and blah, blah, blah. And I'm on staff. And people got to pull me aside and talk me down and then explain where the story could go and what's going to happen and how it's comics and we can put the genie back in the bottle, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually, like, I see where everything's going and I'm like, okay, and I've got to write stories set in this universe. And I'm like, okay. And then the issue comes out and then I see the online reaction and everyone's acting the way I did. But now I'm like, look at these people being unreasonable. Don't they understand?
Don't they understand what's coming?
Yeah, we're all like that. I remember reading a Joe Kelly issue while I was on the Brand New Day team, where like I think it's like the story ended with Norman Osborn putting a gun point blank to Spider-Man's head and pulling the trigger and shooting him. And I remember reading that, going, "How does Spider-Man get out of that?" You know, and I'm working on the team, so you know, you have that's part of the fun of comics, and I get it. I need to be more chill about while people are having their meltdowns of just going, you know, it's the flip side of that kid with the Nazi cap. I know it's happening. I need to be more chill with like, you'll be calm in a year. You'll be fine. It'll all be okay.
Who is Spider-Man's number one villain? Is it Dr. Octopus after what you've done, or is it still the Green Goblin? Or was it always Dr. Octopus?
No, I say this all the time, and it gives a lot of great fodder for people who hate my work because they find crazy ways to spin it. Spider-Man's worst enemy, his number one villain, is Peter Parker. No one can mess up Spider-Man's life the way Peter Parker can.
He's a self-pitying doofus.
Yeah, and also he has this mantra that he lives by. You know, he has this one-line religion that goes, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. He will be late. He would be late to Aunt May's funeral because he was stopping a mugging. And then people would go, what a terrible nephew. How dare he? I saw some online nonsense recently where someone was running a page out of context. And it was from an issue where Jay Jameson, Jonah's father and Aunt May's husband, had a terrible disease and was dying. And Peter had a hand in something in the science that could possibly save him. But Peter felt that they shouldn't go that way, that it was too extreme. That they should let nature run its course and see if there was a less aggressive, less sci-fi way of doing this. And he felt it was important for Aunt May that he was there to give her that advice. And while he's swinging on the way to the hospital to deal with this pivotal moment in Aunt May's life and his life and J. Jonah Jameson's life and Jay Jameson's life, what little that he had left, he's swinging on his way to the hospital. He's promised he's going to be there. Two guys come running out of a bodega. One's got all this like money coming out of his bag, and the guy from the bodega is yelling, "Stop, stop, thief!" And Spidey goes down and he webs up both guys, webs them to the sidewalk, and money's everywhere and whatnot. And everyone starts yelling at Spider-Man. Like, what? Turns out the second guy was the bodega owner's son chasing the thief. You've just webbed my son to the sidewalk. And it's like, well, it'll go away in an hour. Like, I'm sorry. And the bodega guy's like, you're gonna stay here and wait with me. And Spider-Man's like, I gotta go. I'm really sorry. And he swings off. And everyone's like, that Spider-Man's a jerk. Because he's going to the hospital. And the guy is safe. There's people, his dad's there watching him. What is Spider-Man going to do other than stand around and look like an idiot? You know, it is his fault. And I'm watching all these responses online because they saw the one page out of order, and they didn't have any of the context of what Spider-Man was doing or why. And I'm watching all these people going like, "Oh, that's the worst written Spider-Man scene in the world." I'm like, that is every Stan Lee Spider-Man scene, you know, from the first year. That is Spider-Man 101. That scene. I could have just had Spider-Man swing to the hospital, but you get that extra 2-page scene, and now you've really Spider-Maned it up.
Yeah.
And it's weird to me to see a generation of fans, of internet fans, lift something out of context, like one of the 2 pages out of context, is run it, and then make this case for you suck. I and then someone from the peanut gallery goes, you know, in Nonstop Spider-Man, they set up in canon that he has a canister on his utility belt that can dissolve webs. Spider-Man should have dissolved the web and freed the sun. I'm like, well, then it's a pointless scene.
It's not funny that
And
way.
maybe he didn't, he didn't have the canister that day. Or when have we ever seen that canister before? The problem with Spider-Man, and if you want to be an upset fan, is that there is 60 years of history. And because of that, very much like the Bible, you can find a passage to explain anything or to take any point. We had early on in Brand New Day era, we had a scene where a bad guy, like a mugger, got a hold of one of Spider-Man's web shooters, and he's now holding people up, wearing a fake Spider-Man mask, and webbing them and stealing their crap. And the people who wanted to hate the book because Mary Jane wasn't in it and looking for any flaw found an issue of Spider-Man where kids found one of Spider-Man's web shooters and they're trying to use it. But for the sake of that story, the web shooter was calibrated to someone with spider strength. So the kids couldn't push down the button. And they tried everything. They were dropping hammers on it, and it wasn't working. And people found that one story out of 100,000 Spider-Man stories, the one story where you need spider strength to use the web shooter, and you go, aha, the Brand New Day team doesn't know their Spider-Man history. You need spider strength to operate a web shooter. And it didn't matter that I could go through easily like 100 stories where people with normal human level strength use the web shooters. It doesn't matter because they have their one sacred verse now that proves their point. So it's like, I can show you a zillion stories where Spider-Man webs someone up, makes a mistake, and now that guy is stuck for an hour. But because there's one story over there that may have just have been written and might have been written after that Spider-Man story saw print where he now has a dissolving can. Now I'm the baddie. I got mad at Brian for constantly pulling off Spider-Man's mask in every story.
Yeah.
So I did a bit in Spider-Man Human Torch where you found out you can't pull the mask off because the same stuff that's on his skin that lets him stick to walls, he's taught himself to do that to his face so that you can't, if you try to pull. And someone brought that up to Brian once. Went, do I like, and he's kind of like, do I have to deal with that now? No, I'm not dealing with that. And he's right. Because if one idiot like me writes a scene like that, or if one idiot somewhere else writes a scene where, you know, you need spider strength to use the web shooter, you can't hold that as the almighty canon when there's a million other ways to play it. The answer is it's what works best for the story.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same thing when you have a Hulk Thing fight. Who wins? It's not in a math equation. There's a story.
Yeah.
The story is how you win the fight, not who's stronger. Is it great that there's Marvel 2-in-1 stories like against Champion where Thing gets his ass kicked and he can't get off the mat? Excellent. Is it terrible that there are stories where Spider-Man punches Fire Lord hard enough that he falls down? That's terrible. That's wrong.
Really?
He's
I
a
love
Herald of
that.
Galactus. He's a Herald of Galactus. I don't care
So
how many times you punch him.
my case for that then is that I think Firelord was created specifically to lose. So like,
He'd been in other stories. He's a Herald of Galactus. See, this is the deal. See, I'm like you. I'm like all the people I'm complaining about. We all have our different, lines in the sand. We all have our different things where you go, wait a minute. And the
yeah,
problem with comics is all the stuff keeps churning and churning, and characters get more powerful or characters get jobbed more
yeah,
often, that eventually you end up with a story where the Frightful Four are Wizard, Terrax, Galactus, and Sandman, and they're robbing a bank. Eventually, and you go, well, that doesn't work. And
yeah.
it's all very silly.
Who I do think it's silly because like I think a lot of people complain about, how certain people write Spider-Man. I am not the biggest fan of some Spider-Man writers myself,
I love all of them.
but yeah, but I'm like, even at a time when, let's say, someone's writing Spider-Man and I don't like that particular run, there is another Spider-Man product out that I'm sure I will like. There's almost always
Like
something.
when we were talking before, it was like when I was doing Amazing twice a month, you had Avenging Spider-Man. When I was doing another Spider-Man story you might not like, you had Chip Zdarsky on another book. Or he's on a team book somewhere, or it's like being worried about Batman.
For 15 years, there was Brian.
Doing Ultimate Spider, yeah, that you can get your fix somewhere else. Though you should only read my stuff. You should read it all the time.
But see, that's the thing. Like, it's like being mad about Spider-Man or Batman or something. But like, let's say you're a fan of the Silver Surfer.
Okay.
You're right. there's only like you get that product out and you're like, I'm just happy it's there. And you have written one of the most well-loved Silver Surfer runs in history. And I think the thing that makes me amazed at this, aside from, the team up of you and the always great Mike Allred
and Laura
Allred, is that, you did Spider-Man, who is like the most street level big time superhero there is. And then you did the Silver Surfer. Somehow your Silver Surfer story feels more intimate and personal.
Well, there's only two characters that you care. Well, three if you include Toomey. There's only two characters you care about. You're really following the adventures of two characters. So the supporting cast is one character, so it's going to feel very intimate. But the one of the greatest benefits of me working on Silver Surfer was I made a pact with myself not to read the reviews, or not to read the unfavorable reviews, and not to listen to online chatter as much. When I went back and looked at a lot of it after the fact, and some of the stuff I was picking up through osmosis, which I was ignoring, was okay, like when I was working on She-Hulk, I was on every She-Hulk message board. I was talking with every She-Hulk fan, and there was a contingent, a very vocal contingent of She-Hulk fandom that wanted She-Hulk to be kicking ass. They wanted superhero She-Hulk. And the idea that I was going to have her turn back into Jen Walters, and I was going to do courtroom scenes, all these endless courtroom scenes, drove them bananas. And they wanted She-Hulk in like a purple and white costume, beating up people and flexing. That's what they wanted. They wanted 20 pages of that every month. And I was giving them 5 pages of that. And the rest was in a courtroom with wacky Marvel Universe legal shenanigans. But if you were reading my She-Hulk, that's what you liked. The fighting stuff was the boring stuff. The funny stuff was like a ghost is testifying at a murder trial. They're like, what? That was the stuff that was the cool stuff. But I was reading all the reviews and reading all the message boards and talking to the She-Hulk fans who were upset. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put in more fight scenes. I'm gonna do a whole arc where she just works for Shield and fights the Abomination and does all this stuff. And now she's punching Iron Man. And then everyone suddenly, where did all the courtroom stuff go? You have this great book going. Why did you screw it up? When I looked at the Surfer stuff, there were a contingency of people going, I hate this Surfer. This is the worst Surfer. Where's the Stan Lee, majestic speeches and soliloquies? Where's the Jim Starlin cosmic grandeur? Where's the, people wanted, a Buscema shot of him about to punch Thor on the Rainbow Bridge. They didn't want, Silver Surfer trying to find the best ice cream in the universe. They didn't want, weird stuff like that. So eventually, once I'd taken the dive and went, this She-Hulk, this Silver Surfer book is going to be the Surfer book that me and Mike and Laura want to make. And this is going to be our vision and our thing. And yeah, it's going to be 20% my love letter to Doctor Who. And it's going to be 20% my love letter to Marvel Comics and Marvel Cosmic. And it's going to be, a wacky wonky Mike Allred girl on the surfboard with him. And then it just became this fun thing. And we stayed true to our vision and true to our thing. And the people who like that. And like with the Thing, like we said before, like it had its 8 issues and it went away. With Surfer, boy, did we want like 1 or 2 more issues. But once we hit, we told every big story we wanted to tell, and then we got off the stage. Do I want to come back to Spider-Man someday? I could come back to Spider-Man someday. Would I like to do another Thing solo book someday? Yeah, I would. With Surfer, I'm good. Mike and I, we had our time. We did our story. We went from A to B to C. I'm good. Mike's good. If we got together again, we would love to. We would like to pick another character and then do like 30 issues of that and get out of town. That was fun.
And of course, a few years ago, coincidentally, after Disney bought out Fox, not that I'm implying anything by that, you relaunched the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
Off the heels of Secret Wars. I know the ending of Secret Wars is pretty controversial because it made Franklin Richards basically the father of the whole multiverse. What was that like, picking up those pieces?
Fantastic Four. If I was going to leave Spider-Man for anything, it would be Fantastic Four. When my time was done,
who decided your time was done on Spider-Man?
I decided my time was done. Doing Spider-Man twice a month was tough. I like to think a lot of my career has been like a monkey's paw. I get what I want, but not the way I want it. So there's always some twist. You can do Spider-Man, but you must do it 3 times or twice a month. And suddenly, at some point, it's like Lucy in the Chocolate Factory, and you're like, oh my God, I love Spider-Man, but I also enjoy sleep. And also, when you work on a book where you don't own the character, there are times where you don't get to do everything exactly the way you would like to do it. And that's part of the job. And I get that and I love that. Like, I love Spider-Man. I love the Marvel Universe. And I also know they're not my characters. And if someone tells me, like we were saying before, like, could you write a Spider-Man that wasn't married to Mary Jane? Yes, I could. Could you write a Spider-Man who's a mass murderer? No. Like, you have your point. But at some point, there's someone above you telling you, you know, you wake up one day and you go, I want to do a story of giant Spider-Man punching Fin Fang Foom. It's a good thing they didn't let me do that. But let's say I felt very passionately about that. That would sting. That would sting that someone would say, you can't do that. And over time, the tiny stings add up, like all the little things. I remember getting into a huge argument about Peter Parker on a toilet.
Wait, what?
I had a scene. I had a scene where it was originally, and in the end, I didn't have room for it, so it became moot. I argued over a scene that we didn't have the space for. Where when in Learning to Crawl, where it's the first like 60 days of being Spider-Man, it's the space. It's really the time period of after Amazing Fantasy 15,
Yeah.
partway into Amazing Spider-Man 2 is kind of like the zone of Learning to Crawl. And there was going to be a lot of Spider-Man is learning how to do this. And there's certain things that we haven't seen because they happen off panel. And I thought something funny to do would be you're Peter Parker, you're Spider-Man, you're stopping some bank robbers or something, and you have to use the bathroom. You didn't plan this. And you're a 15-year-old kid. You shouldn't have had that taco and that milkshake. And then go and fight crime. So suddenly I had this scene of him like telling the bad guys, like, 1 second. And he runs off and he goes to like a pizza parlor, like a place that he knows in Queens, that he's eaten at a million times and he knows everybody. He's like, I'm just going to use the back. Okay. I'll buy something. And he just goes running through the pizza parlor. But from their point of view, it's that guy that J. Jonah Jameson's been talking about, who might have screwed up that space shuttle that his son was in, and the FBI wants him. He's in the back using the can. I'm getting on the phone. I'm going. And it's Peter Parker in the stall. And the shot I wanted was outside the stall with you see the little Spider-Man leggings and the rest of the costumes bunched up around, like, and he's got his bare calves. And the editor was like, you can't do that. I'm like, why can't I do that? And he's like, I'm not going to have a comic where Spider-Man's pooping. Or you can do that, but you've got to have the leggings pulled up. You can't bunch them down by his ankles. And I am arguing about Spider-Man's costume being, down by his ankles. I'm having, like, it's the most important thing in my life. I'm having this argument, which is insane. Grown men arguing about this stuff. Because the bit I eventually want to happen is the hands go down, they pull up, you don't see anything. And you hear the flush, and he opens the door, and it's like near the end of Blues Brothers. There's a million cops in there, and they've all got their guns. And that's when Spider-Man learns he always has to go before he goes on patrol. So it's like, but in the end, is that important? No. Did it advance the plot? No. And in the end, that sequence was never, not only did it never see print, but we didn't have room for it in the issue. There's no room for that scene. But I spent so much coin and so much energy and so much service arguing about it. And no matter what book you're working on, any book, whether you're working on Quasar, where you're working on the New Defenders, whether you're working on Howard the Duck, you are going to have these arguments because you're human beings and you're putting out a collaborative thing. It's impossible. But what happens is every time you leave a book, it's like you etch a sketch it. Oh, well, now I'm working on Captain Crazy. That's completely different from Crazy Man. I'm working on a new thing. And now there'll be new arguments. But you work on a book for 10 and a half years with only 2 editors. You build up that crazy. You keep shaking the soda can, and eventually you got to open it. So I I love doing Spider-Man, and I loved it very much. But there is a point where I'm working on the book, and I'd done issue 600, and I'd written issue 700, and I could see issue 800 coming. And part of you did realize that I am hogging the ball, and a big flashing sign of that was 800 coming up. So I kind of knew, like there was a point, like you were talking about that guy who was looking for issue 700 and it was sold out.
Yeah.
700 went back to press 5 times. There are still people arguing online. It's a failure. It sucks. Everyone hates it. Like the press 5 times. It was one of the best-selling comics of the century. It did one of the most profitable of the century. It did great. You remember the Marvel Now, how they had the red banner at the bottom of like every Marvel Now book? If a book sold out, then that banner turned to blue for the second printing. If the book went to a third printing, it turned green at the bottom. And there was a point where some people at Marvel were thinking maybe we should switch up Spider-Man, and I didn't want to go. And then one day I went in for a meeting, and it happened to be the same day they had to have a meeting of all the editors to make a creative choice of what was going to be the new color for when we went to an even higher level of printing, because Superior Spider-Man was the first book that was going to need it.
Very cool.
Yeah. And looking at the math of that and having a whole meeting about what's that color going to be because of Superior Spider-Man selling so well. And with the sales success of Amazing 700 and now Superior had rocketed up in sales after 700. For everyone who said people hated it, everyone bought it. It was the best Spider-Man had done in a couple of years. And Axel Alonso had a meeting with me, and one of the first things he said was, "You can stay on Spider-Man as long as you want."
And you did.
No one's going to push it. And I did. So it really was a thing of my own choice of going, yeah, 800 feels right. But I made an ask. I knew what my 800 was going to be. For many years, working on Spider-Man, I was not allowed to use Norman Osborn. I was a Spider-Man writer. I was a Spider-Man writer who couldn't use Norman Osborn. He was either locked up in Thunderbolts, then locked up in Dark Avengers, then he was locked up in a miniseries by Kelly Sue. It was the weirdest thing in the world. Whenever we used Norman Osborn, like in New Ways to Die, or when Joe Kelly did American Son, we were getting him on loan. We had to ask permission. We were the Spider-Man office that had to ask permission to use Norman Osborn. We didn't get the character back into the Spider-Man office until the start of Superior Spider-Man. So we went a long time without any Norman Osborn. And then I built the long arc of Norman will be the guy to defeat Superior. And then coming off the other side of that, I could slowly start making plans for more Norman. Another character I wasn't allowed to use for a long time was Venom.
Oh yeah.
They let me come up with I had come up with the take for Agent Venom. And I was going to do a slow burn. You weren't going to know who Agent Venom was. And you were going to get the reveal in the middle of the Ends of the Earth storyline. Spider-Man was going to be teamed up with Agent Venom. And he wasn't even going to understand that Agent Venom was Venom until he venomed out. And then you were going to get a beat where now, like, once the original plan was on the other side of Ends of the Earth, Spider-Man was going to know Venom was back, and in action, and it's Venom. I've got to stop him, and it was going to be like a whole big hunt for Venom. And this is my original plan. And at one point, he's lost him, and he goes home as Peter Parker, and he's going to carry on the next day. He'll start, and he opens the door, and there is Venom in his apartment. And he's something like, oh shit. And this is during a time where, because of all the Michigas, no one knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man again. Like, the secret identity had gone back into the and he was going to turn to him and in a splash page go, "Puny Parker." And you'd know it was Flash. And it was like just saying Puny Parker, and you would just be like, holy shit, it's Flash. Flash is Venom. Flash is Agent Venom. Oh my God. That was the original slow burn. But our head of marketing saw this trend in digital sales that without Marvel doing any specials or special incentives, people were buying Venom comics. They were digitally. They were just, there was a glut. There was a run on Venom. And he was like, the time is right. We need to do a Venom book. What are your plans for Venom? And I mentioned the Agent Venom and the slow burn for like a year. And then he's like, no, we're doing it now. If you want, we'll do a 0.1 issue. You can do your take on Venom. But then he immediately gets his own book. And that meant someone else had to write it.
Yeah.
So they let me come up with the setup, but then Rick Remender got to write the Venom book. So for a long time, I had no control over Venom, and he couldn't even be in Ends of the Earth because Rick had plans for those months. So like, I couldn't control Norman Osborn. I couldn't control Venom. Weird things kept happening to my schedule, just weird things. Whenever I'd want to use Carnage, I couldn't use Carnage. He would be off in a miniseries. And it wasn't like they planned it. It was just always bad karma. Carnage kept evading me. My entire run, I was the Spider-Man writer who couldn't use Green Goblin, Venom, or Carnage. That sounds crazy, but it's true. People are like, oh, you love Doc Ock. You stuck Doc Ock in everything. Doc Ock was the biggest gun I had on the table because they kept taking Green Goblin, Venom, and Carnage away from me. I never got to really use them unless I was borrowing them. And we had to do lots of scheduling.
Yeah, your next guy was the Hobgoblin at that point, like in terms of the ranking
of wattage.
Yeah.
So when I knew, I said to them, look, I'm going to build up to 800 and then I'm going to leave. But I want a favor. I want everyone to have hands off of Carnage. Let me use Carnage in my final arc. And before I use him, I don't want him showing up anywhere. I don't want him showing up in Deadpool. I don't want him showing up in any other book. Just let him be a mystery. So when he comes back, it's a big thing. Can we keep Carnage off the books for a year? And they said, not for a year, but we can give you like a 6-month window with no Carnage. I'm like, that's great. So for like half a year, there was no Carnage. And I knew that was going to be my big thing. And then I said, and I still have Norman. Can I use Green Goblin? Because my originally, like, if I had my druthers, I would have had 600 be a Spider-Man Goblin fight.
Mm.
And then they were like, okay, yeah, we have no other plans for Green Goblin. So it's like, okay, that's my 800. I will have Green Goblin and I will have Carnage. Great. And I knew those were the two bullets in my gun going into 800. And it just was always up on the board, Green Goblin, Carnage. And I kept looking at it, and it would be Green Goblin, Carnage, Green Goblin, Carnage, Green Goblin with Carnage. Oh my god! Like, that's how that happened. Was these two guys who'd been denied for me for 10 years. I finally really, not only did I have them, but I was like, he's a symbiote. I could put the Carnage symbiote on Green Goblin. Oh my god, that's good. So that, yeah. And then so someone said to me, like, what do you call it? And I'm like, Red Goblin. And then, ooh. And then I was gold. I knew I had gold for 800. But I had a very big ask, which is I never wanted to go out on the explosion. I knew that 800 was going to be big. And I knew it was going to be fireworks, and it was going to be everything in the kitchen sink. I was just going to throw everything at this. And the biggest fight of his life, Spider-Man versus Red Goblin. But it was important for me so much of my run had been Spider-Man goes to other dimensions with a million Spider-Men. Spider-Man fights Doc Ock for the sake of the universe, for the sake of the world. Everything was big. All of Manhattan overrun by spiders. I knew I wanted to go out on a very street level, what Spider-Man means to me story. I didn't, people go, what are the hallmarks of the Dan Slott Spider-Man era? And it's, he jumps through portals and teams up with a million spiders, and he gets specialty costumes. And that was never my intention. Somehow that just happened. And I look at movies and I'm like, Spider-Man gets a million costumes and he teams up with other Spider-Man. Oh, what did I do?
You started a whole thing.
What did I do? He's supposed to be a street level guy.
Oh, now the multiverse is his thing and not DC's thing.
Yeah. I'm like, oh my god, it's now the multiversal costume wearing special tech spider suit stuff. And I'm like, oh man, it's like, I know I did that in all the big beats, but what I hope people remember is that for all of that, there are small scenes of the bodega, small scenes of, when Peter became a scientist.
Yeah.
Like, one of my favorite sequences is when I was growing up, there was a trope where you would see a news agent, and you would see this in multiple Spider-Man comics, where a web would come down and it would web up like a copy of the Daily Bugle. And then another web would come down and it would leave like a buck or a quarter or whatever the money was at the time. See, the minute I said it, you knew where it was coming.
Yeah.
Because it was such a, and then you cut to Spider-Man reading the newspaper, and it would be the villain has done this. I better keep a lookout for the kangaroo. That was like, it was such a trope. And I did the bit where the web misses the Daily Bugle and it hits Scientific American, and it goes up, and it's the Peter's on the cover, and Spider-Man's, he's so effing happy. It's Peter Parker, the scientist, and his latest inventions and shit on the cover of Scientific American. And he's doing the Spider-Man run along the wall and do 20 flips out of joy. And it's because of something he achieved as Peter Parker. Like that, I felt like I did a lot of those scenes. But everyone remembers the big beats. Everyone remembers, when you do the 1812 overture and you bring in the cannons. People remember that. But I hope that people remember that in 180 issues, there were all the little beats too. Um, and those are the ones I kind of savor almost more than the big explosions.
What was the spine of your proposal for the Fantastic Four?
The I knew we were going to get to the Reckoning War, and I knew one of the things that I knew I wanted to do. There were all kinds of different things I wanted to do. Um, I wanted to marry Ben and Alicia. There had been some talks about. Uh, I think it might have been a Joe Quesada concept that there would be a Kree child and a Skrull child, and something would happen with the Kree Skrull War, where Reed and Sue would have to take them into their family and raise them, and that this was going to be some kind of element, like whoever inherited Fantastic Four would probably have to inherit this. Well, not inherit the concept, but it was a concept that people felt was very rich. And my take was, I want to make that Ben and Alicia's kids. I want Ben and Alicia, like the Fantastic Four is about family, and somehow that always translated into the Richards. And I liked the idea of Ben and Alicia as parents with two kids they didn't know what to do with. That, and we knew one of the things that we knew was going to happen was when Franklin and Val came back, we'd do time travel, time space shenanigans, and they'd be older. And that Reed and Sue would now have to deal with teenage kids. And I like the idea of, you have the previously aged Franklin and Valeria kids, and you have these other parents you can ask for help. Like, well, what do we do? That was some of the fun of it. Right now, it's weird now because I'm into the Reckoning War. I think one of the things we've done a lot in our Fantastic Four run so far is we've hit the family beat hard.
Yeah.
You know, Franklin's had trouble. He has to go into therapy. Val is overreaching with her scientific abilities, causing problems. Ben and Alicia are new family too. Man, we've hit all this family stuff hard. And now with the 60th anniversary issue, there is the hovering promise of Reed has a sister out there. Reed's dad slept around, and now there's not just Huntara, there's a half sister on Earth. I wager we're gonna see her soon.
What do you think of the fact that, you had Johnny, right? He cheated on his soulmate Sky with, of all people, Doctor Doom's soldier Victorious.
They were on a break. I don't mean to get all friends on you, but you look at that issue, they weren't officially a couple, and she says she needs time alone and she doesn't want to see Johnny. They were on a break.
So
Johnny's a wag. Johnny's Johnny.
No matter how much growth Johnny
Yeah.
Storm goes through, he always winds up being Johnny Storm. And does it make it
I'm sorry, but that is the province of every single Fantastic Four writer, is the minute the next writer comes on, Johnny immediately snaps back. You look at the Wade run, he goes all the way to like running Fantastic Four Incorporated, because it's not fun to write Johnny in a suit and tie. It's not fun to write a mature, has his act together Johnny. It's not fun. In the same way, it's not fun to write Franklin, who has the power of Q from Star Trek. It's not fun if you can fix everything. It's not fun if you can create whole universes. You want to be able to tell stories of the core four, and you want them to be the core four. That said, someday down the road, if someone unmarries Ben Grimm because they go, I'm used to Ben Grimm, I will hunt them down.
Speaking of Ben Grimm, I mean, one of the first things that you did, obviously, is marry them off. Uh, is Ben Grimm ever allowed to be happy now that they have kids? Like, gonna write them as a
I
happy couple, or
there's a contingent of Fantastic Four fans I shouldn't listen to that we did when we did the point of origin story. You find out that Reed did the calculations correct. They had enough shielding. It would have been fine. He's Reed Richards. Of course he had the shields correct. Um, and that it was the overseer, Spire, who monkeyed around with the cosmic rays and increased the level of cosmic radiation. And at the epilogue of the story, which is in the Mole Man issue, and they're having drinks on the roof, Ben says to Reed, like, all these years, I blamed you for that. We're good. That weren't on you. This made fans really upset. But they didn't look at the other half of the equation, which is Reed says, no, this is still on me. This is still on me. I sent us into space. I got the science right, but I never thought there'd be anyone like the overseer out there. He got the science right. He got people wrong. He didn't think they were he thought everyone in space would welcome them with open arms and we come in peace. He got the people wrong. He got the science right, and his friends paid the price for it. And his brother-in-law bursts into flame, and his wife goes invisible. He doesn't know what's going to happen to his kids. He turned his best friend into a monster. In Reed's mind, and he's clear as a bell as this, he still has that guilt. We did not wipe away that guilt from Reed, but we did have Ben go, I'm not going to ring that bell anymore. I'm not gonna, we're good. And when Ben is getting married, Ben pretty much says, I look at where all the dominoes fell in my life, and it got me to Alicia. If everything didn't happen the way it happened, I wouldn't have gotten to Alicia. And she is the best thing in my life. I am grateful for every damn thing that happened in my life that got me to Alicia Masters. The whole journey's been worth it. So that's where we have men right now. And there was a scene in a recent FF issue where he sees his son, Joe Ben, Joe Grimm now. Ben is his Cree last name. He is now the House of Grimm. So he sees his son, Joe, hanging out with kids on Yancey Street, and he's Caucasian. He's a Caucasian kid. Not one bit he looks like a pink Cree instead of a blue Cree. And he's been using an image inducer to look like a normal Earthling. And Ben takes him, is like, what are you doing? And Ben gives him the talk, like, you don't use that. You're my kid. I love every blue bit of you. You put that away. And he tells his kid, there was a long time in my life where I would have given anything to look human. I know, I understand what you're going through. And his kid looks at him and goes, but you're you're Colonel Ben Grimm. You're the thing. I know like all of Cree history. You're a legend. The battles you won, the things you've done is the thing. Why would you change that? And he's like, if I feel the same way about you. And the kid destroys the image inducer and he goes back to being blue. I don't see a world where Ben could change now and be the father he is to Joe Ben after that moment. Um, there, it's weird. It's like I liked writing Two-Face in Batman. I liked it a lot. He's a great villain. I don't know how I could write him now at my age and the life I've had, where I look at Two-Face and I go, this is a man with a horrible disfiguring burn on his face. That and who has deep emotional scars is what makes him a villain. Um, what does that say to some kid who's reading the book who's a burn victim? What does that say to um, if you're Ben Grimm and this is who you are, then you know what we were just talking about with Johnny, how it resets. Where I am with Ben Grimm is this is who you are. Some people are going to look at you when you're walking down the street and they're going to think you're a monster. You screw them. You're Ben Grimm. You're from Yancey Street. You're better than this. You know, you do what you do. I like that as the character now. That's in my heart where that character is.
It's a good place to be.
Yeah. It's all different. When with one of my jobs working on Spider-Man, I walked the wall. I stayed on the wall for Flash Thompson's legs. When Mark Guggenheim wrote the story where Flash lost his legs, we got so much mail from wounded warriors that it was very important to me when I would read those letters and I would see the response we get, that we never do anything to get Flash's legs back. That Flash is who he is. He's gone through this trauma, and he is a hero, and he will continue to be this hero. That I'm cool with him being Agent Venom, and when he suits up, the symbiote becomes the legs.
Yeah.
But even when he's got that symbiote in him, he's still in the wheelchair. And I became someone who would not stop. Like if a story was coming in from another writer or someone wanted to do something with Flash Thompson where he got, Marvel Universe robot legs, or if he got, used the lizard formula to grow his legs back, I would be the guy going, we can't do this. We have to stop this. Because somewhere out there's a wounded warrior reading this book and they like Flash Thompson just the way he is, and why the hell not?
Yeah.
It's weird the things you find yourself fighting for when you work on these books and you work on these characters. I got into a lot of grief with people online where I was saying, because I still do write Spider-Man. He shows up in Fantastic Four hanging out with Johnny Storm. And if I go to write another book, I'm going to have Spider-Man guest star every now and then. I've made a choice, which is when I'm writing Spider-Man now, I don't have him crack jokes about someone's appearance in certain ways. It just feels wrong because there'll be a young reader who looks like that reading this book. I didn't feel this way before. It's a stance I've had that's grown over time, because hopefully we're always still learning and we're always still changing our views on things. I wrote a Captain Universe story many years ago where, and I had a completely different worldview on people in comas, people in vegetative states, where I had a story where a woman is looking after her father who's pretty much a vegetable. and she's using all her life savings. She can't go to work. She can't leave him alone. She can't pay for a nurse, and she's eating up into her savings to look after him and to be with him all the time. Um, and people in the neighborhood see that every so often she leaves the apartment, goes to the pawn shop, and comes back with some more money. And on one of those times, they come and they break down the apartment door and they're going to rob her. And the Uniforce comes into the apartment, and instead of going into her, it goes into her father, and he becomes Captain Universe. And he gets up and he, as Captain Universe, beats the crap out of those guys and sends them on. And before the Uniforce leaves, he gets a chance to talk to his daughter. And she's like, "Oh my God, no! Keep this thing. Let me keep talking to you, and let me." And he's like, "It's got to go. It's got to go. It's going to the next person who needs it." And he tells her that he hears her, and that he's there, and that he is there. He is inside. He knows everything she's doing for him, and he wants her to know he loves her. And then the thing goes away. And I wrote that in my 20s, and I hadn't had enough life on me. If I wrote that again, he would say, "Pull the fucking plug. Go out and live a life. I've had a life. Let me go. I love you, but let me go." It would be a completely different ending. And to my horror, they kind of reprinted that story when they did a Captain Universe thing. This thing I wrote in my 20s.
That's where life
You know,
gets you.
yeah, we grow and we change, and we get different viewpoints, and we learn things. And the more people we let into our lives, and the more we see their lives, the more we grow too. So, and hopefully that never stops.
So, the Reckoning War, was it always going to be a Fantastic Four thing?
It could have been the Initiative. It could have been the Avengers. I like it as Fantastic Four. The minute I got Fantastic Four, I liked it as Fantastic Four. Because so much of it is the Watcher and the history of the Watchers. And when you think of what family of book the Watcher falls into, it's the FF. So me working on the FF was the perfect place to do the Reckoning War. And the Reckoning War has now become way more for like the emotional beats and the heartbeats. It's become a Fantastic Four story. It is a Fantastic Four story. I'm really glad in that one She-Hulk shot that we saw Reed and Ben. So that makes my life so much easier. But yeah, I was eventually going to tell this somewhere. It didn't feel right being a Spider-Man story.
No. Reed didn't cause the accident anymore. Franklin is not a mutant. Ben is happy. It seems like you are looking at things that have traditionally been seen as the core of the Fantastic Four, and you are tweaking them, either removing them, changing them. Is that like
Johnny's a living star right now. It's too hot to be around.
Yeah.
There's always something. And Reed right now has all the knowledge of the Watchers. Ben currently has a giant gaping wound on his chest and is facing the woman will probably kill him. So they are far from status quo.
They are very far from status quo. And now let's talk about the Watcher one shot that's out this week. Drawn by a great artist,
Javier Rodriguez. Oh, it's so good. Javier is so good.
What's in store for us?
The first three comics I ever read, the first three Marvel comics I ever read, were the Galactus trilogy. That was my introduction to the Marvel Universe. Yeah. And those three issues are like my bedrock. They are so important to me, and they form so much of how I see the Fantastic Four. And that my introduction to the Marvel Universe was the introduction to the Silver Surfer. That's when I heard no one was writing the Surfer. And they wanted to do a new Surfer book. That meant a lot to me. because I think I mentioned like my college superhero book was a
In
surfing
yeah.
superhero. So yeah, I you know um, the premise of this what if issue is something I wanted to do forever. It's a what if issue, but it will have a direct effect on the Reckoning War. Um, the whole deal with the Watcher is he has one defining thing: he can watch and never interfere. That's it. If you had to explain the Watcher to someone, he's an all-powerful being who can only watch and never interfere. And what's he done? He's interfered. He interferes the fuck with everything. Every time you have a big Watcher story, he's interfering. It's the one thing he's not supposed to do is interfere. And the only other times we see the Watcher is he's sitting on the moon, bored out of his ass, and just watching everything. So he amuses himself by staring off into the apex of all reality and looking at a what if. He's a channel surfer. He watches. All he can do is watch. So every now and then he gets bored and he goes, I wonder, what if the X-Men were vampires? You know, I wonder, what if Captain America were the president? You know, that's what he does. And we call them what ifs. He does two things. He watches and not interferes, but he interferes. And he watches what ifs. That's the guy. Now, when you look at that, those two things, there's one what if he's never watched. There's one obvious what if he's never ever seen. And it's what if I never interfered? What if I stuck to my guns and never if I was the Watcher and I could turn every freaking dial on my giant magical TV set, I wouldn't go, what if Spider-Man had stopped the burglar? No, I'd go, you know, I'm not supposed to interfere, but I interfere. Let's see what happens if I didn't. You know, that's what I'd watch. And you know why he doesn't watch it? Because he's afraid. Owatu is afraid. He doesn't want to see that. So this is the story of all the Watchers shoving him down into a chair, clockwork oranging his eyes open, and forcing him to watch the one what if he's never wanted to see. That's what we're going to get this week.
And
And yeah, and they go, let's skip all the minor shit. The time you did this or the time. Let's look at the biggest thing where you ever interfered. Let's take a look at the coming of Galactus and the Galactus trilogy. Let's take a look at that. What happens? What happens if you don't put that wall of boulders around the earth and set the sky on fire and call Reed Richards and talk to him for like a week? What happens if you don't go in his lab and build shit with him? What happens if you don't send Johnny to get the ultimate nullifier? What if you don't even warn them that Galactus is coming? What do you think would happen? That's the issue. Javier Rodriguez drawing the living hell out of this, just we're going all in on our 1960s chords on the phone, Nick Fury's hairstyle, just boom, just the most F-ish thing in the universe. I'm so happy with this issue. I this one, even if you're not even reading the Reckoning War, just pick up this one issue and just go, I'm going to read this because this is everything I want. Galactus fighting and FF and Silver Surfer. There is weird little tiny beats in this where Tom Brevoort, who's the hardest human being to get a good response out of, went, ooh, that's good. And he loves FF. Where there's like one, you learn things in this about that will have an effect on the Marvel universe, and especially the Reckoning War.
how many what if
You can't wait.
scenarios are in the book?
One. It's the one.
It's one.
That's it. It's we've only got 30 pages. But when you read the original Galactus trilogy, it's not 3 issues long.
No,
Stan
it's
and
2.
Jack are, it's not even, it's crazy because it's you get they're off with the Inhumans.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Stan goes, you know what? I'm done with the Inhumans. We're done. Okay, we'll wrap that story up, and they head back home.
Mid-issue.
You get a half an issue. You get a half an issue of Galactus is coming, and then you get a good solid issue of here's Galactus and the Silver Surfer, and then you get like a half an issue of, and we wrap that up, and Johnny goes to college. They did the Galactus trilogy in like the physical space of 2 issues.
It's got 3
Isn't that
great
crazy?
covers too.
3 amazing covers.
3 amazing covers. The third one is Johnny going to college.
Johnny going to college. Because you get this feeling like with the whole Lee Kirby run, it's amazing. There's like new things every issue, but you really do feel like they're a kid with a shiny object. And they're ready to play with the next thing.
Yeah.
Here's the next thing. And that's part of the manic energy of the Lee Kirby run, is like they keep throwing things at you. And when Kirby feels like he's grounded, I'm gonna throw some collages together to mess with your head. You're like, it's one of the greatest runs of any comic in the history of mankind.
I don't know how true this is, but I heard that Kirby would just keep drawing, and then Stan would be like, "Oh, you've already exceeded the page count. Just give me a splash page to put in the front."
You would have, for that kind of stuff, you need to go to Brevoort or Mark Waid or Kurt Busiek. Those are the guys who can tell you all the behind the scenes, what really happened. Anything I tell you is like fourth hand.
Yeah.
That somehow gone through. That if you just go to them, you'll get the better version. There was like a great Jack Kirby story I'd heard, and it very much informed how I wrote The Thing and Alicia. And you remember when I gave her Alicia that boyfriend?
Yeah.
In the Thing book, Arlo North. It very much set how where supposedly when Jack was courting Roz, there was this very like artsy guy who was also courting Roz. And there was some moment where Jack and that guy were alone in the room, and Roz had stepped out, and that guy, there was a piano, and this guy had been playing this beautiful piece, amazing, and pressing Roz, and Jack was there, and Roz left the room, and supposedly this story could all be bunk. This could all be bunk and hokum. Supposedly Jack turned to the guy and went, if I closed this lid, I'd break all of those fingers. And then the guy never came back.
That's in
my mind, Jack Kirby talks like the Thing.
Mine too.
my favorite characters in all of comics to write, to sit down and type, are either J. Jonah Jameson or Ben Grimm. They're my favorite characters to write.
You write a great Jonah. Yeah.
I do the voices when I'm typing. And I'll be like, Alicia, I'm going down to Yancey Street. Hey, Stretcho. And just like, I'll just be typing. I'll be so happy. And all I have to do for Jonah is just go, Miss Brandt. Just go, Miss Brandt. And then I'm in Jonah. I'm immediately into Jonah. Don't even have to go, Parker. No, just Miss Brandt. And then I'm like, boom, everything. Wall crawling weasel. It all just flows. But yeah, Ben Grimm and Jonah, easiest characters to write.
Dan, you clearly love your job, but you clearly love writing. You clearly love getting into these characters. I know I've taken up more than 3 hours of your time. I have one last question. There is one franchise, one character that informs all of your work you're clearly a big fan of.
Hit me.
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who is my favorite TV show of all time. I love Doctor Who. I grew up on Doctor Who. When I was 8 years old at my grandma's house on the East Coast, we would visit on the weekends, and weekends we'd visit on the summers, and they didn't show Doctor Who on the West Coast where we lived. They showed it on the East Coast on her PBS. So whenever we would summer at my grandma's, I could watch Doctor Who, and it was just like so trippy. And then my dad's job moved us to England when I was 13, and then I got to watch Doctor Who like on British television as it was coming out. I was addicted, and when the magic of the 2005, when they brought it back, Russell T Davies, and they made it even better, I was screwed for life. So yeah, I lived for Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who, and I am finally writing a Doctor Who comic.
Who is your favorite Doctor?
The one from Gallifrey.
Do you have you ever tried pitching for the show?
Yeah, I tried pitching for the show. I did, knowing full well that as an American, I would never get the time of day.
Really?
But I've made enough connections and ties to people on the other side of the camera that I did a pitch. I threw in 5 Doctor Who ideas. 2 of them were salvageable. That though they were very Doctor Who level ideas, 2 of them were salvageable where I could take them from the pitch and dust them off and examine them from a different angle, and one of them became the Silver Surfer story where Dawn was replaced by a hologram.
Okay.
On the planet of Incandescent. That was one of my 5 Doctor Who pitches. Yeah, but the others were so rooted in Doctor Who lore that they couldn't be. There was no every part of the buffalo with them. There was no way to salvage them. But yeah, no, I tried. There are so many things in my life that I tried which don't happen, and that's the way it is for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's that old saying, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. That you just have to try, and you can't let yourself be crushed when someone says no, or when that pitch doesn't come through. You pick yourself up and you do the next thing. If I didn't feel that way, I would not had a shot of being the guy who wrote Spider-Man for so long, or I wouldn't be the guy who's now writing Fantastic Four, and I wouldn't be the guy that Titan Comics kept pressing and going, please write some Doctor Who comics. And I'd be like, I can. Oh, fine, I'll do it.
Did you choose the 10th Doctor for your comic, or was that given to you?
Well, the plan as it stands right now is we are going to do one special a year. I can fit that in. One Doctor Who special a year, and the first special is starring 10 and Martha, and with a backup with 9 and Rose. Okay. So something tells me we might see a different Doctor in the next special. So I'm thoroughly enjoying ticking off boxes, but very much like my Gil Kane Two Gun Kid story, if everything stopped after this first one, I would be content that everything in the kitchen sink is gone in this one. There's a lot of good in this. There is the core idea is one of the things I pitched for a TV episode. And I got to make up villains in the Doctor Who universe, which is a joy. And these stories are set within the first 2.5 years of the new Who continuity. And you will see some baddies from that time, those eras that those doctors could meet. and you will see at least two classic kind of Doctor villains in all of this. So it's the whole gamut. But that said, if you're someone who only knows me through Silver Surfer and you've never ever read Doctor Who or watched Doctor Who, you can jump into this. We will hold your hand. There's a lot of Easter eggs for and a lot of fan service for classic Who and for new Who, but it's not just fan service. There are stories, and if this is your intro, it will be very new reader friendly.
Thank you, Dan. This was a great interview. Thank you for your time.
Anytime.
Thank you for answering my questions.
Awesome.